pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Caramba?
Here.
Councilman Wood?
Here.
Councilwoman Carr? Mayor Simmons?
Here.
Councilman O'Flynn?
Here.
Councilman Gibson?
Here.
Councilman Forrest?
Here.
Well, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody had a great 4th of July. I climbed a mountain. I'm sure people did some other things. I swam a mile, and I don't look any different. Here I am.
Well, good you're here.
Yeah, but I'm here, right?
Well, glad you
Exactly.
made it. No casts.
No casts, no broken bones. I guess for the budget workshop here, Arlene or Ann, do you want to get us kicked off?
Sure, thank
Okay,
you.
great, thanks.
These recording.
I don't know if this is working or not. I got a loud voice anyway. I don't know if this is picking up, but
I don't think it is.
no.
Yeah, it's on. Just very light.
I think it's on. We're-
Yeah, I guess it is. It is.
Now they are.
I think it is. Yeah, great. Yeah, now they are. Thanks. Wonderful.
Oh,
Thanks,
good.
Arlene.
Okay. Good morning, Mayor and Council. This morning, this is the first of our preliminary workshop. We'll be into our official workshop on the 16th. And we wanted to give you a high-level overview of some of the expenditures as well as our financial position. And there were some things throughout the year, especially the mayor's received some requests from the public on certain items, and some of you received these emails asking direction on whether we were interested in certain properties or programs or projects. We wanted to give you a chance to discuss that as well so we could see how we needed to prepare for that in the budget as well. And there are some internal discussions about the capital improvements projects. And then we've asked community development. They have some interest in looking at their staffing positions and the workload that they have, and they want to be able to present some ideas to you about for next fiscal year as well. So with that, I'm going to ask Ann to start. Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. We have public comment first.
Yes, yes. Public comment? Members of the public that would like to speak? Tad? No? You're good? Okay. I don't see any public comments, so I think we're okay. Thanks.
Great. Wanted to touch upon some things that we talked about previously, but we have some updated information, so we wanted to cover that first off. First agenda item, just going to follow the agenda down, the update on the current financial position. And you do have a copy of this PowerPoint in front of you as well. These numbers didn't change because these were the numbers that we ended our last fiscal year with, September 30, 2017. And just wanted to point out that these are different components of our fund balance, some of which are spendable going forward, some of which are already committed, so we don't have the option to spend them another way. So the items that are spendable from our categories of fund balance are these two amounts. These are generally referred to as unassigned fund balance, $4.9 million, and also our reserves, disaster reserves, operating reserves, totaling $5.1 million. So these two groups of numbers are what we have spendable coming into FY18. So we look at the next slide, and this has been updated to reformat it a little bit and then also to give more current information. This first column deals with the original budget. In the original budget for FY18, we have a budget at a glance page, and these are the numbers that appeared on that budget at a glance. And the significant thing about this column is once we knew that the hurricane had arrived, we had to increase our expenditures. So this included $6 million for hurricane expenditures, the estimate that we had at that time. Again, as you know, rough estimate. That left us with our total ending fund balance that I'm saying is spendable, which would be the $5.1 million in operating and disaster reserves plus $19,507. So with the $6 million in here, we were going to basically use up all of our unassigned fund balance and only have the disaster and operating reserve remaining. But we had like $19,507 of the unassigned. So with this budget that we entered the year with, that's where we thought we would be. This is where we expect to be based on the best information currently available. This number ended up, when we had the audit complete, we ended up having a little more fund balance in unassigned, so that was a good thing for us. So we came into the fiscal year with this $10,022,610, of which $5.1 million are operating in disaster reserves. So this is what we're looking at as a best guess on revenues. I will say this revenue number is conservative. We don't like to project more and then come up short. So that's conservative. Expenditures and commitments. Expenditures are based on what you'll see in the budget book, which we'll be going over next Monday, which shows what each director has indicated they expect to spend this fiscal year. So that's where that number comes from. Transfers out to get down to total, starting with $10,022,000 down to $4,812,237, which means that we have dipped into, we've spent all of the unassigned and have dipped into our reserves, or disaster and operating reserves, to the extent of $287,000. Okay.
Council, any questions?
So, the unassigned fund balance is wiped out,
That's correct.
and we're short 300,000
Correct.
toward the disaster and operating reserve.
That's correct.
Council, anything else? Fred?
Yeah, of that money that we spent because of Irma, I think it was a little over $6 million or something like that. How much of that do we project will eventually, keyword eventually, get back from FEMA?
What you'll see in a later slide is what's in here for hurricane expenditures, and you include what we also incurred in FY17. It's above $7 million. It's more like $7.7 million, plus we still have more costs related to it. The best estimate that I have, because the bulk of our dollars are in the debris, and we do have a favorable, I'll call it a favorable FEMA match, that they're paying a good portion of it. So my best estimate right now on the FEMA money is $6 million.
Okay.
But keep in mind that we did spend over $1 million last fiscal year, plus what we are
Right.
spending this year.
So then, well, I said keyword eventually because
That's correct.
I'm among those that don't believe we'll see all that money for at least 7, 8, 9 years. Second question, if, God forbid, if we had another Irma-type event this year, where would we be for the money we're going to have to lay out like we did this time?
Right here is where we are,
Mhm.
$4.8 million, and then you're looking at possibly borrowing.
Either borrowing or canceling projects.
Right. There's, as we go through the budgets, there's a couple places, and we talked before about borrowing interfund, but we have to have a repayment source identified when we do that. But we do have, we're going to end the fiscal year with about $2 million that will be accumulated in the 2011 debt service fund, and that money was accumulated from communication services tax and the electric franchise fee that was increased. The rate was increased for both of those, and so that's been accumulating, and that is a revenue stream that is unrestricted. So council would have the authority to transfer those funds if necessary.
Okay.
But that was, as you recall, that was council's decision to put it in the debt service to relieve the burden of debt service.
Can I just follow up on Fred's first question, because I'm unclear on the answer. The money that we get from FEMA, whenever we get it, is that baked in, is that included in that number or not?
No, it is not.
It's not. So your best estimate is that's how much money?
$6 million.
6 million. All right, and where does that stand today in terms of our best guess?
We have not been able to get an answer from FEMA as to when we can expect that.
communities are starting to receive money. We see those press releases, so the
Yes.
process has started.
Yes.
But it's just,
Right.
should any follow-up there needed?
We talk to them on a weekly basis, so we're working closely with them.
Any side conversations as to what the communities that are getting reimbursed are doing different than, not different, that's not the right word, you know what I'm saying?
Right. I did find early on when I was getting some answers on the time frame, it seemed like those jurisdictions that didn't have much in debris costs, they had other damages, they were able to get expedited. The debris has a lot of required documentation, and as you are aware, that it took a long time, and we still learned 2 weeks ago that there still is a billing coming from Crowder Golf that we haven't gotten yet. I was told that I would get it the week before the 4th of July, last week of June, and I still haven't gotten it, so I'm pursuing that. But you have to, for those costs, you have to have all your costs to submit for the it's called Category A, and we're going to go over that information coming up here.
Fred?
Yeah, on that, piggybacking on what you said about checking with these cities that have they received, or can we find out, did they get a lump sum full payment, or are they on the payment plan like at least the county was with Hurricane Charlotte?
We can find out.
Greg?
I just want to kind of follow up on Peter's original comment. So with this far right column, I guess you call it, with the 287, that's what you're projecting that we're going to be short this fiscal year. At the end, September 30th, we're going to be dipping in the reserves that much.
That's correct.
And staff is proposing in the requested budget to reimburse the 287 that's covered in the proposed budget that you're receiving today. So it would be restored.
But in theory, one of those numbers, which one was it you said was conservative, Ann?
Revenue. The revenue.
Revenue.
Could be a wash. You're giving us worst-case scenario.
I wouldn't say worst case, a conservative estimate.
Okay.
But
But
that's
that's
a
where
good
you'd
point.
have to go to the money in the communications tax, because your operating reserve is, your unassigned fund balance is zero reserve. Where are you going to get the 287 from? Was that the comment about the?
In the proposed fiscal
Yeah.
year budget for this coming year,
Right.
we're proposing taking out of our budgeted funds from revenue projected for 2018, 2019, to first restore the 287 prior to other expenditures.
What funds? I mean,
It-
is that the
we
communications
have-
services tax?
No, it's in the general fund, and it's revenues that exceed expenditures and transfers out in the FY19 budget.
It's based on the new taxes to be received,
All right.
Next year's revenue.
next year's revenue.
One last question I have, which is the word commitments that's in there, and expenditures and commitments. So that expense number, is that fully loaded for what you anticipate we'd have to pay to Crowder Gulf and the hurricane? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're fully loaded it for the commitment. In other words, it's not paid.
Right.
But you're not, I'm not criticizing, I'm just making an observation, but it's not fully loaded for the reimbursement.
That's correct. That's
Interesting.
correct.
All right.
And that's basically following our accounting rules.
Okay.
We can't,
And that's the $6 or $7 million number?
$6 million.
$6 million. Okay. Thank you.
And no, Greg, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir.
No, I'm just going to say, because I'm hearing 7 point whatever the number is, and then we're projecting 6 million. That's not at 90%, or is that at 90%?
90% was just for the first 30 days of debris removal, then the scale drops down.
I got you.
And for other costs like the road projects and the parks, that's at 75%.
Amazing.
Well, assuming we got all the money back, what's your guesstimate of the $6 million? What would the return be?
The 6 million. That is.
We build
that
out
was-
higher than 6, but we're getting 6.
All right, so let me rephrase it then. What's the
What's the true number?
Yeah,
What
what's
do
the-
we really spend, not what we're getting back?
We haven't, if you want to roll right into that, oh, well, that's on the agenda that we'll.
All right, we'll wait.
Okay, yeah.
Just one last.
No, we
follow-up.
want to dissect it before we see it.
No, I guess, and maybe it's coming up in a later slide.
Right.
From the original budget, you had expenditures and commitments of 18.7. Now we're at 19.9. The difference of the two, the 1.2 million, are we going to talk about where we missed the mark, or?
Well, that's in the book for next week,
Okay.
for next Monday,
All
but it goes through, it shows the detail of what's expected, but a lot of those were individual transfers that came before council where we had items that weren't budgeted in the budget, and one of them was to increase the budget for the hurricane expenses,
Oh.
that we had to do that.
Have we
Fred?
had the FEMA auditors in here going through all the, because I know Matt Feeney said when he was at Fort Myers Beach and went through a similar event, not as bad as Irma, but it was pretty bad, that long after FEMA left, the people that came in and helped us, another crew comes in as auditors, and he said they found all kind of stuff that the first batch of FEMA people had approved that they were eventually ended up being disallowed. Has that happened to us yet?
That hasn't happened. The process has changed, I think, from that time frame, and now we are actually required to upload into the FEMA portal every single supporting documentation,
Okay.
every single invoice, a lot of maps where each of the debris disposal sites are located, the debris disposal site, their permits for operating, so an extensive amount of documentation is all updated, and the FEMA rep is reviewing that information
Yeah,
prior
that
to forwarding.
off-site, so to speak.
Right, because it's all loaded into the FEMA portal,
Gotcha.
which is what's taking a lot of time, and then it's a lot of documentation. But the documentation of how we procured our vendors for these costs that we're requesting reimbursement, all that information
Good.
is uploaded. It's a little bit different from prior years ago when you submitted on a piece of paper and said, these are my expenses, and then they paid you, and then they sent auditors 3, 4, 5 years later to decide if they're
Right.
going to actually give you the full amount.
Good.
So can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I'm just looking at last year's budget at a glance, all right? And this is the initial thing we got, so, the number's slightly different, but it doesn't matter. And it's the unassigned funds. Unassigned was, in this thing, was $4.9 million. It's probably something, oh, actually, it is the same number. Give or take $2,000. But there's a footnote on the bottom at the end on the unassigned budget at a glance. Planned use of that number was Beach Road and 41 intersection. So it's an unassigned fund balance, but it's, for lack of a better word, was earmarked for that.
That was
That's what it says, footnote 1.
a description to identify future uses.
Right.
And so it's based on what was in the CIP for future years.
Right, so, on that whole budget at a glance, we had, for each of, not just the general fund, but the special purpose
Right.
funds, we had indications of where the unassigned money
be used.
was going to be assigned.
Well, or could be used.
Well, all right, but right, but I mean, it was an indication of how we were going to use it.
Right.
Obviously, things can change. That can change
Right.
in the regular budget.
That's
all right?
correct.
But that's gone now.
Correct.
Okay.
Anything else, council, on this slide, or do we want to go to the next slide?
Next slide, okay. This shows, just as a follow-up on the other funds, the projected fund balance of other funds.
That was quick.
Did you want to talk about those?
Well, let's look at them a
Okay.
second. I don't, you want to just give us the 30-second run-through on this in, or?
Road impact fees, that's a projected fund balance available. So that means that it's already removed from that, or any CIP budgets that have already been approved to use road impact fees. So they're funds that will be used in the 5-year CIP to help fund the road projects going forward. Park, you see that just as one column instead of two with the change in the park impact fees. We have combined the community park impact and the regional park impact fees, and of course, same thing with that's used for a lot of the CIP and also with the gas tax. So those fund balances are basically beneficial to have to move forward with our CIP projects. The building fees fund, as you know, that's restricted, highly restricted as to how it can be used, and that's been accumulating. And that road debt service, which is the 2011 debt service fund, that's that $2 million that has accumulated from the communication services tax and electrical franchise fee. And our downtown debt service, that's primarily accumulation of a little bit of interest that we've earned on unspent bond or loan proceeds that still remain in that fund. So that can be used for the debt service going forward.
What's that percentage rate, Ian, that 68,000? The 1 or 2 or 3? I mean, I don't think anybody's, you said interest earned?
1.7%
1.7
is what we're getting on our money market.
Okay, thanks.
Are any of these balances restricted, like, for example, building fees? If we got hit by like another Irma, could we borrow from that? Not spend, borrow.
We went through that last year,
Yeah,
right?
that,
I
we
think
went
we
through that last
determined
year.
that that wasn't
Yeah.
permissible.
What did we say last year?
Well,
She said no.
we
No.
said that it would be permissible for a very temporary basis. And
Okay.
with Irma, it's not, we're not sure when we're going to get that $6 million.
What, all of these have that kind of restriction?
They're not as strong of restrictions.
Like gas tax would?
But yeah, we have to, yeah, they're restricted as to how they're used, so it needs to be, it
They
cannot
have to be paid back, but,
Right.
but they're not as restricted on paying back quickly as building fees.
Possibly, yes.
Okay.
I defer to Audrey on that.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay.
Freddie, you, go ahead, Pete, no, sorry.
No, but this is not a cash flow analysis, in other
Right.
words. Right. So the issue of if another hurricane hit, do you have the cash to pay? It may be a cousin to this, but it's not
Right.
this,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that's a bigger question. How
Yeah.
much do we have adequate cash?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what I was going to say, is Fred driving at something bigger or smaller
Yeah.
or whatever? And
Yeah.
right, that encapsulates what I think maybe Fred's driving at.
So maybe we can have that number.
Yeah.
But
Right.
what's your general view on that? Do we
Yeah.
have adequate cash?
We have adequate cash
Right.
for something similar to the storm that we had
Right.
this year, those costs,
I would think so.
to make it work. It would just be, we would not have wiggle room.
Right.
It would be very, very close.
On the road impact fees, that's 7.9. Does that include is the 3 million put back in there from Everglades?
Yes,
Or okay.
yes.
Council, anything else? Ann, anything else on this?
On that?
Okay.
Okay, ready
Thanks.
to go to ad valorem taxes. That's a little bit of good news. This is an update of what you saw in June, and we do have, as you know, the preliminary estimates, and trend remain where our increase in property taxable values were shown at June 1 at 3.89%, and the increase ended up being, for the preliminary number released July 1st, 5.43%. So we are seeing some increases, but as you can see, compared to recent years, it's not as big of an increase anymore. And any questions on that?
Well, not immediately, but what do you think, Council?
If I could also just mention, because I really hadn't highlighted it too much, this was interesting too, the new construction amount.
Stable.
No, an increase there, but it's an increase from the prior year.
It's pretty stable.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Council? Okay. All right, it is what it is?
It is what
Okay.
it is.
It is what it is, okay,
It is what-
fantastic. Thanks, Ann.
Okay, and these are the calculations. Starting with the current millage. So there's the estimated, I should say, I'm sorry, preliminary taxable property value. This is the updated property value for the downtown area. That increase did not increase that much from the June 1 number, just really slight increase. So this is the amount that we have to deduct from our value because the dollars, the ad valorem taxes related to this amount will go directly into that 2014 debt service fund to service the debt. Multiplied by using the current millage rate generates 8.4 million, and doing the 96%, which we use as a collection factor because people pay within a discount period and sometimes there's adjustments to the taxable value, to give us $8,076,929. This is what we budgeted in FY18, the current year, so that's an additional 406. I've rounded it for budget purposes to 406,900. So it's in the budget book.
But that's in the general fund, but it's really 406 plus 232, right? That's the addition. You're just allocating it to two separate funds, one for the downtown and one for the general?
And the amount that's associated with this goes into the, right.
Right, so what I'm saying is, the increased ad valorem tax, is it not 406 plus, oh, well, how much is going into downtown? Extra.
I can tell you.
It's not the 232, I get
No,
that.
no, that's the value.
Oh, is it 8,000?
The total, pardon?
No, I'll let you answer the question, sorry.
8,256,900. So total ad valorem, 8,266,900, which over the budget, over the 18 budget is 436,900.
All right, so
Yes.
it's 436, of which 30,000 is into downtown?
Right.
Okay. And the 406 is in the general fund?
Right.
Thanks.
I just have a question. I don't think it's relevant for this fiscal year, but should that amendment pass where they could increase the amount of,
Homestead.
what's it-
Homestead.
Homestead example, that wouldn't be for this year, it'd be the following year?
It's the following year.
All right, so we're okay for this year. Okay, thank you.
This is just some examples of different millage rates, and again, this is in your handout, but just updating with the impact of example of different millage rates beyond our current millage rate, the impact on property values that are valued at these dollar amounts.
This is not a statement about, I want to increase the mill rate, but when we were going through that thing on high school, on the cops, on the sheriff's thing, Cape Coral is like 6, not 0.6, they're 6
Right.
point something, and Fort Myers is 8 point something.
Right.
Just,
And this is from the last year's calculations, but these are the maximum amounts that our millage could go up at one time.
And what would be the millage if you didn't increase the revenue? Do we have that? What do they call that?
rollback rate.
Oh, the
Rollback
rollback.
rate.
Yeah, what is that?
I haven't calculated. That's part of the calculation on the trim forms that we do, but I haven't done that yet.
It's probably 0.7 or something.
Last year was 0.7721, I believe.
Yeah, $432,000 more that you got. Well,
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next one was revenue enhancements. We, again, mentioned the potential for increasing the electrical franchise fee and the communication services tax, and I was asked to provide some other jurisdictions' rates, and there's a chart shows where we compare.
Fort Myers not available, they were holding out on us, were they?
Oh, yeah.
Governor's Beach.
They didn't, I don't think they have one.
Okay.
Wait, Fort Myers is there?
Fort Myers Beach? No, I'm
Oh,
sorry,
oh,
Fort
oh,
Myers Beach, NA.
Oh, I get it.
Feeney, you told them not to give it to us? Is that what you did? But I mean, it's, well, you say it's consistent, but then you look at Cape Coral at 3 and Naples at 5.9, so I guess that's,
Kind of contrary to what
yeah.
Pete said, when you got a millage rate of 6,
6.
do you need 8?
Right,
Do you need extra fees?
Yeah.
correct.
And that was-
Council, any thoughts there? Is what it is, right?
So we're at
We're at 4 for
4,
and 3.61.
which was the one that we had approved, but then we were told legally we could only go up X?
Right. We had approved the electrical franchise fee to go to 4.5, and we were at 3, and so we were limited in any 1 year to increase it. The limit was 1%.
1%.
So we went from 3% to 4%.
And how much money is that? Do you know offhand?
Yes.
Meaning the 4.5 versus the 4?
350,000
Oh, you have it there?
because on behalf of this.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, half of 1%.
And we have a sunset, I think, don't we, on those
Yes, we
rates?
do. December 31st,
2022.
2022.
Tied to the, what do you call, the debt?
Anything else, Council? Okay, Ann. Thank you.
Hurricane costs, we finally got here. This is a summary of where we are. Costs incurred in FY 2017, $1,149,630. Costs incurred through June 30, 2018, $6,601,036 for a total of $7,750,666. And we have an estimate of remaining projects of about $1.2 million. You have a very detailed handout that was by your places. This is in the format that FEMA requires us to submit our projects, so that's why it's being presented that way. But it goes through the different categories, and you can see the details there. And here's a summary of them. FEMA, as everything has to fall into a category. So category A is debris removal, and you can see from the chart that that is the largest amount of what we've spent to date, $7,094,000. I did just have an estimate in there for this remaining bill that's out there. Not sure what it's going to be, but I have $110,000 in there. And I think that that's hopefully high.
So incurred is incurred but not necessarily paid? Is that what, I'm trying to go back and tie this into that previous discussion. 'Cause
No, these are all paid,
$7 million is paid.
right? Ties into our schedule. We keep track of, we have a big worksheet that tracks every dollar amount. You had gotten copies of that early on with the sorted by vendor. You could see the vendors' names. The only thing, the reason why I said incurred is because there are some costs that we can submit that for the use of, and we have very limited of this, but for the use of our equipment. The other one that's a cost that we incurred but not charged necessarily for the hurricane. The community development folks did the inspections, safety inspections, safety of the structures throughout the city, and of course, that was part of our existing contract with community development. But that is something that we have submitted to FEMA for reimbursement, and John was able to provide us with the detail costs associated with that. It's about $22,000, I believe.
This may be a, go ahead, Peter.
And the only reason I have a little, in my own mind, I know you're doing a great job of getting a lot of information quickly, but I'm going back to that commitment point. I thought, maybe I misheard or whatever, but when we talked about commitments in the general fund, I thought we said, I may be wrong, that there was $6 million that we hadn't paid out yet. I'm trying to get at, this is basically the hurricane on one page?
Right.
All right. So leaving aside the commitment point, $6.6 million has been paid out.
The $7.7 million.
$7.7 million
Right.
has been paid out.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
all right. So back on, you don't have to go back to it, but the general fund, where we had expenses and commitment to $19 million, leaving aside this $1.2 million,
It's in there.
yeah, so that's paid out. It's
Right,
not
it's in there.
yet to be paid to creditors.
That's correct. That's correct.
And so the only part that's up in the air is the $1.2 million, meaning it hasn't been paid?
Right,
Oh,
right.
gotcha. All right.
Because we haven't spent it yet, yeah.
All right,
We
We're
haven't.
projecting that into the next fiscal year.
gotcha. Thank you.
This may be a conversation for another time. I don't want to bog down with this, but when the hurricane came and went, and it was time for debris removal, we had an operation or an agreement in place with Crowder, and that's why we used them, right?
We utilized the existing contracts that Lee,
We entered into separate contracts.
separate contracts based on the procurement process with Lee County had in place.
I guess what I'm getting at is I'd like to re-examine that process or maybe better understand the process. I've been told now talk is cheap, but I've been told no less than 3 or 4 times that we have been absolutely raked over the coals with those costs. And other companies would do them substantially, if not half the cost. Don't know if that's true, have no idea. Feel duty-bound to mention that and to look into that process. Maybe a bunch of hot air, don't know. But feel, like I said, duty-bound to mention it. Would like to do a further outreach when this happens again. Hopefully it never will, but the reality is it will at some point. Rather than doing what's expedient and convenient, I'd like to do the work on the backside, the flip side, this side of the process, to have some options in place. And if I'm all wet with that,
Just to
so be it.
follow up on that, I think that we are, I hope, planning to have some kind of a update on our emergency
Yes.
response, and I think that would be appropriate to consider pre-planning in that. And, I have some concern of pre-planning of the dump sites, and certainly our relationship with Lee County, who I thought, didn't we join on their contract with it or something? We didn't have an individual contract, we just sort of hooked
We're
onto
under
it.
an interlocal agreement.
Right.
That says that we will use their contractor.
Right, so I mean, I think we need to, that should be certainly on the agenda, and I totally agree with the mayor in that.
And if we're I'm sorry, Amy, I'm sorry, you.
No, I agree
Yeah.
with what you're doing, but I think that's a good place to look at it all together, because not only do we want to see if we have the, like the infrastructure kind of parts to that done, but this financial and planning, pre-planning, and our relationship with Lee County Emergency Service, I think is definitely in order.
And if we're duty-bound to do that, why aren't they duty-bound to pay for officers? Somewhere that enters into the equation.
Well, we can only do one thing at a time.
Understood.
My mind
Understood, but we need to create our
agree
own
with you.
flexibility.
I had a related point, and I actually thought this is where you're going, but, which is, I've been told many times that Estero did not pay at all. That is, they paid a small chunk. That Estero had Lee County did the entire cleanup for them, and that what they are going to pay or have paid is some small kind of, well, I don't know what you want to call it, deductible or something like that, some small sharing percentage. So all the cash flow stuff, all the record-keeping stuff, they're like, they're not touching that. Lee County's doing that. And the question is, why can't we be in that position? With the same people. But Lee County has the contract. So whatever that is,
Right.
it's Lee County's issue. That's more for Arlene than for Ann. Maybe it's for both of you. But I mean, any reflections on that?
I do understand, previously I thought when Wilma was here,
Wilma.
that Lee County did do that function for us at that time.
Right.
And I understand, I think, is that Estero being new to it, that they did assist them with that. I don't know in future years what their intent is with covering that, but we were understood that it was our responsibility during Hurricane Irma. But I do understand there was support for us with Wilma.
Well, maybe you can reach out to Estero and just see what their deal is, what they think their deal is this year, God forbid.
Adding to what the mayor brought up, on this thing of we have local people that can do this cheaper, what I was told by several people, which doesn't mean it's right, probably more misinformation after
Right,
Irma than
understood,
right,
sure.
but that FEMA has a list of approved contractors, and you have to use one of their approved. Now, piggybacking on what the mayor said, it would seem to me if we have some local people that we really feel have got those big trucks, which is another issue, the big, almost the double tanker size big trucks that you put the debris in, we need to facilitate them going and doing whatever they have to do out front to get certified. So then we have a list of people that include our own people.
Right.
And we've got a self-serving interest because it would probably be cheaper, plus it's keeping the money in the local economy, which I'm sure we're all big on. So I would add that to what I think we ought to check on.
Let's do our homework up front, find out what we can do, what we can't do.
And I would remind everybody.
Throw it out to an open bid and see what happens.
We are now almost less than 2 months away from when Irma struck. So we don't have a lot of time to do this whole thing.
So
Hopefully we won't have an Irma this year.
This company didn't have to bid against anybody. They just picked their rate and did it, correct?
No,
But they had
it was a competitive solicitation by the county when they were selected. And that's part of the documentation that we had to submit to FEMA, based on use of that vendor.
And, well, we should tread very carefully down this road because if you have an ordinary, if there is such a thing, hurricane season, then we can rely on more local people. But when you have the size of the disaster that is widespread and causes damage both to businesses and other things, you need, I believe, a national company where they bring people from outside the disaster area in there. So that's, we need to discuss this carefully. There's a reason why you go to those kinds of companies, because they have the reliability, which is exactly what you need when you run into, a critical problem. I mean, we have to realize we're trying to plan for something that was I still believe it was an extraordinary event. And we have to decide, where the sensitivity is.
One of the important issues to address in any procurement process is the reimbursement of FEMA funds. So
Right.
all of those procedures have to be fully documented. And so that any company that would reply to their procurement process, they have to be able to be qualified through FEMA, or else we would be ineligible for the reimbursement.
Right.
Oh, sure, completely
So
understand.
it's complicated, as
Yeah.
so many of these things are.
It is, but I'll leave it at that. Greg?
We need to do our homework, I agree. The other thing is it just seems to me, if we go down the road of letting Lee County do it, then we're at their beck and call. We may be the last one on the list to get everything, and I know
Like everything else.
that when the hurricane hit, you and me and all of us out at the EOC were scrambling to make things happen right away. I know weeks and months later, there were still people picking up debris in unincorporated Lee County where we were almost done. So I think some of that stuff we really need to look at. Again, going back to it needs to be looked at, but treading lightly on it.
Correct.
I don't want to be at their beck and call. it's our city, and if we want it cleaned up, we want it cleaned up
Yeah,
now.
no, I agree. I agree.
I'm with you.
Gibby? Good? You're good? Okay. You're awful quiet over there, Mikey. All right.
I do have one question when it relates to category G. Just looking at the summaries, the Parks and Recreation, and looking at the detailed summary. There's a lot of things here that are like 1%, 2%, 30%, 40%. What is our expectation on when is that going to be done? And what is the reimbursement, and how far out can we, I hate to use the word drag it out, how long can we take to do this and still be reimbursed?
For those projects, it's 18 months from
Okay.
from the
All
date.
right.
Do you want Nicole to?
So we actually had prepared, when you're ready, I'd like the directors to come forward and kind of go over a very high-level overview of the projects they have coming up for this fiscal year related to hurricane repair. So Nicole, if you wanted to come up and just give a very high level of what you have remaining.
Yes, for Parks and Recreation, which is mostly category G. I mean, we did have some in A and some in B in terms of debris, but that's all been taken care of. Most of our damages, we did wait until after season, especially for Marnie Fields, which was completely destroyed. That's all being taken care of right now, as well as I did just hear from the Little League president today. Their season is officially ended, so we'll be taking care of all of those this summer. So most of our repairs are going to be done this fiscal year before October. The bigger ones, such as the boardwalk at Riverside Park, we are working with Hans Wilson and doing specs and things like that. We do need engineers for some of the work. So those are the projects that are going to take a little longer. But we do have until March, and we expect that all of the projects will be completed by then.
Okay.
But yeah, we are having, the ones that we're having to work with engineers to fix are taking a little longer. The ones that we can do where it's just getting quotes and hiring a vendor, those are going to be done a lot quicker.
Matt, if you want to.
Matt Feeney for the record. Basically, we have two outstanding road repairs that were caused by the storm. One is Morton Avenue, or Morton Grove, sorry. With the shoulder, there's some minor shoulder damage up there that we'll be looking at repairing in the upcoming months. And then Kentucky Street, where Michigan Ditch crosses, there's a high volume of water that moved through there. We had some road failure with the culvert. We shimmed it up temporarily, and we'll be putting that out to bid. We solicited quotes immediately after the storm, and they'll have to go out for a public bid, so we're working up a bid package for those.
Just a follow-up, Matt, just a quick question, and you may or may not know the answer to it. Basically, what is the long-term effect of, let's use Bonita Grant, since it's in my wheelhouse, with the water rushing over that for 5 days prior to the storm, then almost 2 weeks, that can't be good for the road.
Sure.
What's the long-term outlook? Are we going to, if we do have to replace it, is the county or somebody going to get money for that?
To begin with, it is not our road, but of course, where the water stood on the roads, we'll see failures over time. I can tell you right now, having walked around with plenty of fine folks from FEMA, their process is not geared to cover those types of long-term failures that you're going to see. So I'm sure that we'll see shorter lifespans on some of those assets, but they don't manifest themselves in the time frame that these type of funding programs are.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just the truth.
It would be something we'd have to prepare for in a capital improvement project as we get reports back of where we are in conditions.
I just take the question like Morton down by Farmer Mike's where it washed out.
That's where this.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but even on all sides of that, even going in towards Wellfield, towards BSU stuff and all that, with that water sitting on there, it just seems like they should allocate some type of funds for the future.
Their inspection process, just from walking with those folks in the heat of the storm, their inspection process for storm damage is very focused. And so they are looking at absolutely direct cause and relation
Cause and effect
relationship.
impact, that's it.
And if they can see it, and they're only going to pay you for that repair.
Okay.
So those types of longer-term chronic things that we know will be caused by this storm, they're just not set up to.
Gotcha.
Wouldn't Terry Street from Grandy over to I-75 where we had lots of water in places going across the road, that would be a similar problem? It'll probably rear its ugly head eventually, right?
It's possible. Sure.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Of course, once you've had an opportunity to review any of these projects, we're happy to give any more detailed information.
The 18 months is for everything,
18 months.
for all categories, A through G.
So is some of it's insurance, some of it's FEMA, is that?
Correct.
Okay.
There is
The
the total amount.
It's just showing how much we are actually getting, or have gotten from our insurance, so that reduces how much we submit to FEMA.
Okay.
Council, anything else? Okay. Great. Thanks, Ann.
And next agenda item, if we're ready to move to that, deals with capital projects, and I know that when this workshop was scheduled, Councilman Forbes was interested in discussing capital projects. You do have a separate spreadsheet at your place, legal size, that details the 10-year plan. It does show for each of the projects the expenditures through June 30, 2018, and then shows the remaining available potential I'll call it a carryover, but some of that's going to be used in the current year that will then go towards the project. And the other thing I want to mention about the presentation of the CIP is that the 10-year plan includes just what is planned to be budgeted in FY19 going forward. So it does not include that carryover amount. So if you look at the 10-year plan, you need to consider the fact that there could be some carryover that would also go towards those projects.
Also,
Can you say that again?
On the big spreadsheet,
Right.
the far right-hand column says total 10-year plan.
Right.
That's covering funding requests from FY 2019 to FY 2028.
Oh, it
Does not
doesn't
include the
include-
carryover.
The carryover.
Right. And we do have some projects that we have been fortunate to be able to allocate some budget, and it is accumulating, so there's some big dollars. The quadrant project is one that we have some big dollars there.
So, for example, Logan Boulevard, the fourth one. Oh, I got you. So 1,762,000 is just from 19 forward. It doesn't include the 567.
That's correct.
correct.
Oh.
And also, at the next meeting on the 16th, these will also indicate where the funding source is for each of these items, whether it's road impact fee, gas tax, or general fund, or other form of grant.
Right.
Fred, do you have some?
Question, in what you've put together so far, as we learned a bitter lesson last year in our legislative requests, we got some money, kind of, maybe it's just a package of money, so when we get our act together on what we're going to ask for in the legislative requests, that we've got 50% match theoretically of what we put in for. Now, we'll never ever get to where we need all the money, because in our best day, they're only going to probably approve one, maybe two projects, but we need to make sure we've got funds that we can use for a local match.
Well, within the planning period, we do have, they would be able to reflect that, but if they're looking for an immediate in that fiscal year, we'll have to address that and find out from the legislature if it has to be reflected. For example, with the FEMA program, we're working with the local mitigation strategy. It has to be reflected, the 25% match has to be reflected in the fiscal year of the grant project. So you'll see that reflected for the
Right.
Logan Boulevard and Pine Lake Preserve. Whereas we're anticipating a Tier 2 project for the Spring Creek, Bonita Springs Golf Course, we're able to push that out into another
Fiscal year.
another year because the 25% would not be required until the next
Right.
fiscal
So
year.
another way of putting it is, some of it has to be real money.
Correct.
Some
But-
is just to show.
So I think
Yeah, show it that
we'll
you're
need
going to
further,
do it.
we're going to need further direction from the legislature as to where they expect to see the match. Is it in a planning cycle of the capital improvements project within a multi-year span, or do they expect to see that dollar value reflected in a current fiscal year?
Well, Fred,
Yeah,
that's a
I
very
think on the
important-
legislative, generally, as long as, because by the time they get to releasing the money, you're almost in the next year, you could temporarily borrow funds, but, and we need to look at 50%. I know people got some with 0, but we were consistently told that that's where we needed to be by, with Brummel, Donaldson, Caldwell, Rodriguez, and Fitzenhagen. I
Right.
think. So that's pretty strong force that you do
Well, the
much
number
better
keeps
if you do
going
that.
up.
Yeah.
I thought they won 25%.
50%,
Was that accurate?
50%.
Well,
Well,
if
we
it's-
should clarify that, because that seems
I just
unbelievable.
clarified. I told you who all told us.
Well,
He
I'd
was
like
in the
to-
room with me.
I would like to go and ask them specifically what that would be, because if that's really how they operate, it's pretty unbelievable.
I think we'd like to clarify too where they expect the real dollars to be reflected.
Right.
So is there a cash commitment in the current fiscal year when you're applying to the legislature, or can it be demonstrated in a capital improvements plan for over several, is that the level of commitment
And
as well?
and that's a huge point,
Yep.
all right, because if it's in the future, you could put 100%. I'm not to be
Right.
squirmy about this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. If we're looking to do this in 2021, we can put 50,000 away or 100,000 away for the next couple of years and do it ourselves.
No, I'm just, yeah, there's a difference between real money and a projection of what you're going to do.
Right.
So that's just equally important, I think.
Well, I think that's the conversation that needs to be made with, I mean, because most of these asks that we asked for were storm-related damages and long-term fixes. To ask us for 50% right then and there, I think was not germane, because we didn't know Irma was coming.
Right.
No.
Now, these were projects like Pine Lake Preserve.
Right.
We've had that on there for the last
Yeah.
3 years. I got that.
Right.
I got it. But as far as doing these other stormwater projects, they weren't on there. We didn't identify them.
Well,
Now we
right.
do.
Now we do.
So,
Anything else here, council? Okay.
Well, this is, it says it right here, staff requested. So this is staff's best, this is what we have to come back to
Right.
next
Yes,
week.
we'll be looking, yes, we'll be
Right.
looking to have you take a look at it and provide
What
us
do we
with.
think about your
What do you
ideas?
think, exactly. And provide us some more direction today as well as the 16th. We'll be
Right.
prepared to take more direction on the 16th.
but on the 16th, you'll have the funding where you want to get it from, whether it's
Correct.
coming
On the
from gas
16th, you're
tax or
going to see
whatever.
where it's gas
Okay.
tax, general fund.
How you plan on funding these requests?
And actually, if, in the budget notebook that you're receiving today, that is for next week's meeting, under the capital improvement plan, you have the same, you see the same form behind there, but you'll see the individual forms for each project.
Right.
So it gives a description of the project. It does show the intended funding source going out for those projects. I wanted to reserve distribution of a formal schedule until I've completed the 5-year projection to make sure that the funding sources will be adequate that I've identified, but that's the intended funding source.
So I'd like to make kind of a generic point today, which is that understandably, we kind of focus on, well, these are the exact projects we want, and that's what our focus is, and that's what we put in here. I mean, that makes sense, right? But I think one thing we haven't done that would be worthwhile thinking about is being more aspirational about other projects that aren't going to get done right now, but that should be built in over the long term. And you could take examples of that on the bike multi-use, you know. In other words, where we want to be in 10 years. That's not today's money.
Right.
But I think I think it's for staff too, if council agrees, that'd be worth thinking about, just so we have a better idea of a long-term plan. And, you know, it's understandable it's not what we normally focus on because we have limited resources here and limited things to do, but just an idea.
Well, I think it'd be important to at least somehow prioritize these projects because frankly, right now, I can't think of anything more than flooding mitigation, and I see that as a very long-term project for all. I mean, it's not a project, it's multiple projects, and just let me finish a minute. And I do think that we have to understand how those suggested projects work with us to help there, and we can't do more than help. And if that's, in my view right now, having not balanced that against other projects that we're doing, I don't think we should do anything else besides that for the next 5 years.
Not even think about other things?
Well, we might be able to think about it. I'd
That's
like
what
to
I'm
finish,
suggesting.
you know, but I do think that we have to understand our limitations that we have over the next 5 years.
I
you know,
totally agree. What the
you
point
know,
I'm making has got nothing to do with
You
that.
know, so if 10 years later, you know, if we want to dream about something, that's one
Not
thing.
dream, plan.
Yeah.
Plan, I think that's the plan.
But I mean, I
that's
think
the-
like the Sun Trail, I think, you know, the 2 Sun Trails that we're talking about, that's, I don't know what time frame that is, but we want to get that somehow on the books.
And there may be other things
Yeah.
which don't compete.
Mhm.
That's my point. So you're saying, setting up a this. I'm not at all into that. I'm saying, obviously, water problems are our top priority. I don't think anybody would disagree
But it
with
does
that.
compete because we have
No,
obviously
what I'm
limited
saying is,
money.
let me just finish my thought, which is, what you're saying is, water has to, what I hear you saying is, water has to be our top priority. 100,000% agree with that.
Correct.
It doesn't mean that we shouldn't plan. What should our parks look like if they're the best parks in Florida in 10 years? What should our multi-use path system look like in 10 years? Those are not competing ideas. Those are long-term projects that come behind the immediate. And what I'm saying is, it's nobody's fault. I'm just saying it would help us to just think about what those long-term projects are. That's it. They're not going to compete with the flood.
And I think also with that, we can throw, we don't have to throw large dollars at it, but, you know, dollar here, 10,000 here, 10,000 there. 5 years from now, you're talking some real money that's in there to do some of these projects or to kickstart them.
Well, that's a different point, and that may go a little more to what Amy's concerned about. But
Yeah,
I'm
but-
just,
If you don't plan for it and put money to it, then it has
Right.
no teeth.
okay.
To me, it's a paper tiger. We can say we want the best parks in the world, but unless you're willing to put a dollar to it, like the Sun Trail, we want to
Right.
have a nice Sun Trail
Right.
with the railroad. Unless we start planning it and putting some dollars to it, as we see from the state legislature, they're not going to give it to us.
And there's a related point with this, on this, and it's true of the Sun Trail, which is, if we put that in with real money, all right, that real money may not be our money. It may be grant money, it may be federal money, it may be state money. It's not competing with the flood stuff.
Right.
So, by doing that, it basically, and it's what you're saying.
Yeah.
It energizes us to move on it, as opposed to not.
Well, I agree with Greg that if you don't put at least planning money in there, even dreams will never come true, you
Right.
know,
I'm not
unless you want
dreaming.
to start planning 5 years from now. So
I'm not talking about
we do,
dreams.
maybe we should have like, think about putting some kind of a planning line item in for all these,
Oh, that's good.
you know.
Yeah.
Just planning, and it doesn't have to be for the Sun Trail or specific, but just
Because
aspirational planning, whatever, if there could be such a thing
Well, I'll
like
give you an
that.
example. We have, Mike knows this very well, we have a bike master plan that has a lot more in it than just this stuff. Why not put it in there for the future? And then we see, it's almost like the Tiger stuff where they call it build now, right? All of a sudden, wow, this money's coming our way. Well, we got something in there, and people are, well, what, it's not even in your plan. You know, I'm not saying that about that, but that type of stuff. Anyhow,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, and I just think the other thing that we agree 100% that the flooding's it. That's what we got to concentrate on. But you know, there's also things here that we still have to look at. We still have to run the city. We still have to make sure the parks are looking good, the rec center, the fields, all these things are happening too. And we, in my opinion, just because of the business I'm in, we need to plan that out. The rec center's not going to last forever. You know, this city hall is what it is. We're either outgrowing it or we need to think about, these are things when we talk about planning, what are we going to do in the future and start putting real money towards that. Now, to Fred's point too, let's say we do that over 4 or 5 years, and then 4 or 5 years from now, 8 years from now, we get hit with another Irma. There's where that funding mechanism, we don't have to worry about can we take it from the building fund. We have little reserve accounts for it. 50,000 in Sun Trail, 100,000 for a new city hall, 200,000 for updates in the rec center. Now we've got a couple $1 million sitting in allocated reserve banks for these future projects that we can borrow from if we have to get it, instead of worrying about can we take it from the building fees, can we borrow it from the road impacts, and how are we going to pay it back in a timely manner. It's just a thought process.
One of the things that we can look forward to too with the stormwater utility is we're hoping that they're going to be giving us an idea of the impacts of the actual projects that we need to address as well, that based on your fee schedule, so that would be another source of income. But there's going to be projects we're going to identify out of that process that we need, that we'll need to identify where specific funding can be allocated to through the stormwater utility. So the amount of project increase helps determine the fee schedule of how we move forward with the capital improvement needs as well.
Actually, that's probably one of the, not going to get done in a week, but one of the most important things have to be added in here, all the stormwater projects.
Exactly.
Including the ones that we don't have because functionally we don't think we have the money. That's what's stopping us. So I don't think that's a dream. That's, you know, a plan to do something like that. It's going to be real money. Anyhow.
So we stand by for any other recommendations or considerations you like with these projects. For example, one of the things you all talked about is placing, we just placed a placeholder in 2020 for Sun Trail as an example of $250,000. That was just staff's making sure there was a place marker. We understand if there's an increase to that or adding to additional years.
But not for today. I don't think it's, I mean, I'll come up with something for next week, but I do think we want a big chunk of change at the end, which is not our own money. It's kind of what Estero has in their budget, that they have things in their budget that they're looking for grants or looking for federal or state money. And I think as long as we do that clearly, so we're not talking about general fund money that's competing with, for example, the flooding, I would do something like that on the Sun Trail, something like $10 million. But once again, not our own money. It's some of our own money. What do we have, 50,000 in? But other federal, state, or grant money.
Yeah, on the bike trails and all that, I know you all saw that email saying that, I think it was FDOT had moved forward on getting a 99-year lease on the rail. Now it's for light rail, but if they have the lease, you wouldn't be that hard to take that 125-foot right-of-way and get them to agree to.
What was that?
What are you talking about?
There was an email that came out in the last few weeks that the FDOT was moving to get a 99-year lease from the railroad and for the purpose of light rail.
Here?
Yeah.
Can you send that around? Probably we already got it, but can you send that around again if you got it?
Well, if I can find it.
All right, thanks.
I have to do a search or something. I thought it was interesting.
It is.
But it's for light rail. That's why they want the 99-year lease. But if you have that right of way is 125 feet and wider.
Or Matt, does anybody have that? If Fred can't find it,
Does that ring a bell with anybody else?
I'm not sure of that, so I'll have to, I'm not, Matt didn't. And I'm seeing Matt shake his head that he hadn't seen that, so.
Track it down, or whatever.
But we'll see. We'll see what we can find.
Yeah.
One question I have on the last slide, Ann, and this is as much for maybe community development as you, which is, I'd love to get a handle on exactly how many impact fee credits we've got out there. what that bank is,
Okay.
and maybe like, who's got them?
Okay.
If council's ready, we could move on to the community development staffing presentation.
Council, we okay? Any more questions
I don't
for a
think we want
moment?
to look at this, do we? I said, I don't think we want to look at this, do we?
We were going to keep this at a very high level today to begin, but we wanted to introduce it so that we could get some direction and have an opportunity for council to discuss further. In the staff's proposed budget that's in front of you, you will see that we did include the request for the positions that are funded solely out of the building fund. That is that lockbox account. And John's going to go through what those positions are. We did not include the request for the ones that would affect the general fund, so we wanted some direction from council on that as well.
Good morning. Kind of feels like a report on what we did over the summer. I can't have all you follow me around because that wouldn't make sense. So I've put together a lot of graphs to kind of show what we do and how we spend our time to talk about some of these positions. This shows what our building department has been doing since 2013. And I'm sorry, these are annual permit numbers that reflect what we've done. It starts with 5,800 and change. In 2013, it goes to 6,600, 6,700, drops down to 6,400, up to 7,900, and right now, for this year, we are at 5,600, and that 5,600 includes this lighter green. I have asked that this slide double because we're halfway through the year, so we anticipate that we will be somewhere around the neighborhood of 11,300 permits by the end of the year. That is in comparison to the 7,900 last year, which was the most that we had processed to date. And to date is going back to 2008. This breaks it down by month. Unfortunately, it gets a little bit busy on the screen, but what it does is show you that 2018 is the yellow with all of these, and as you can tell, every month is significantly higher than the previous 2 years, and the previous 2 years have shown increases over the past. This gets into the engineering and what our development services group is doing. And we've done the same thing here that we did on the building permit side. You'll see that for the development orders, we processed 21 last year. So far to date, we've processed 11. So we're anticipating if you were to double that, considering we're only halfway through the year, we will have done one more development order application this year than last. Limited review development orders. Those are everything from generator pads to 1,000 square feet of impervious space. Sometimes they're very minor, sometimes they tend to get rather technical. We are now at 60 for this year. We processed 95 last year. So if the pattern holds, we will be somewhere around 120 compared to that 90.
Johnny, are you still in the building fund here?
This just shifted to the positions that would be split. So what I'm basically doing is covering all of them because they are a lot more interrelated in terms of practice, maybe not in terms of funding. And this says what's active. So we have, as you can tell, every year going back to 2015 with 9, 10, and then 13, we expect that number to continue to grow this year as well. In the limited review development orders, kind of the same thing. Now what you'll see, what I've always found interesting is 2015 was one of the busiest years. But in the world of engineering, that basically just gets a lot of these things going. So just because all of those numbers are decreasing, we are actually busier now in terms of the number of active construction sites and active engineering projects that are underway than we were back in 2014, 2015.
John, could
Yes,
you
ma'am.
just go back? I just have a question about the slide before,
This one?
the last one. So, the
I'm
one
s-
you just hit on. So that means that you have, whatever that, is it 9? I can't read it too well.
This, yes, the blue is 9.
All right. So, and then you have just 2 that you've executed, is that what it says, approved? Yeah.
Those are the ones that
So
have
is-
officially been approved
so
and
is
have
that-
started construction.
Is that ratio a problem? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that as the blue is what we have submitted for review. So it's 3,
Correct.
4, 6, and 9. And what is under construction is the 9, the 10,
Right.
the 13,
But if
and
you
the
look
2.
at that progression, you have a lot more approved. The green is much higher than the blue, but except for that
Until
current
this year. Yes, ma'am.
So does that indicate a problem? That's the question. Or is it just an anomaly there? Normally, the green is higher than that.
Yes.
All right. So
Well-
that's illustrative of what you're getting at. Is that correct or not?
That, yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And so this kind of breaks down their activities. And what you'll see is the blue at the bottom is plan review. The orange is inspections. And then we put in the gray. These are pre-application meetings, but these are strictly for development orders. These are not the zoning pre-application meetings that we've talked about a lot with you before. So, like I had said before, all of these plans that are under review in 2015, 2016, 2017 are now under construction. So a lot of the things that we're doing are shifting more towards the field work and getting out there and inspecting all the things that we've previously approved. And what are they doing? Too early. And that's basically the same thing by calendar year. But this is what they were looking at. If I let my engineers do what they wanted, they would be spending about half of their time working on problems like this. This looked a lot more significant in the field. This finished floor of this house is 5 feet higher than the finished floor of this house. And what I want you to see here is what needs to be done to get this slope to this grade by the property line. One of the biggest problems that we have in terms of problems in the field is single-family houses where new development is going next to older development. And older development is anything that was built from the 1940s to the early 1990s. And as the FEMA maps and the FEMA requirements have changed, the elevations have changed. But what we have to do almost on an individual basis is figure out how we get the water that falls on this property to drain properly either to the front or to the back without causing damage to this neighbor. Now, you can tell the velocity of this water has already taken the silt fence down on this portion of the site. Where we had the contractor install gutters to focus that drainage from the roof, it's already eroded all of that fill. And so this is from the front of the house looking back. So each one of these houses takes a significant amount of time for our staff to figure out how do you make it work. This is the back of the same house, and what happened is this water was coming off with such velocity that it had actually taken the fence not entirely down, but had knocked it down significantly and was draining into the neighbor's pool back in here. So working on putting in a small berm there to stop a lot of that water. So the reason why we are here today is because we're looking to increase some staff to handle this increased workload. What we saw previously was a lot of our work that we're handling was the zoning, was the long-range planning. A lot of that work is now turning into construction. So we're looking to augment the staff so that we can actually accommodate the reviews and the inspections for a lot of where the work is now. And that work currently is in the engineering department and in the building department. The planner that is being requested is basically because of the planning involvement in each of those areas. It's not so much because of the rezoning applications or applications that UC's request for approvals. They're basically carrying out all of your land development code standards and whatever conditions you put into these zonings and making sure that they're put into development orders and into building permits.
Why isn't that all out of the building fund then?
Because the building fund is very particular in terms of how it can be used.
Right.
And I'm able to split the EI and for that because half of what that position would do is drainage, and drainage is included in the building code.
Right.
The planning position is entirely unrelated to that, which is why it cannot be.
John, this problem,
It's a discussion that I've tried to figure out, because if that can be funded that way, it makes everybody's
Well, the
life a little bit
obvious
easier.
point, maybe not for today, but the obvious point is, sorry, Fred, you want to say?
oh, no, go ahead and finish. Same, I want to talk about the same thing, but a
Okay, the
different
obvious
point.
point is, some guy comes in, you have this issue. I'm assuming part of whether you give him the permit relates to whether or not he's conforming with the code. So why wouldn't all of that be arguably
Because the
tagged to
standards,
the building fund?
because the standards that we're looking at for this particular project are found in Chapter 3 and not in the building code. The reference to the drainage in the building code is very generic and does not provide you any real direction other than thou shalt do no harm to neighbors.
For another day.
On the point I was going to raise, that is that the problem is made worse because in our land development code or someplace, the space that we're allowing, the minimum space between two homes is so narrow that that causes a problem. Why don't we change the land development code so that that house, any house in a new development that's going to be next to a house of an older development has to have a greater separation to help reduce the problem that we're running into?
The issues that we're really facing are not in our newer communities because they've been engineered with current standards, and even if they're not the most current standard, they're close. Our problems come in neighborhoods like this. This is off of Jackson.
Oh.
And where you have essentially infill development, and you have houses that have been built through the decades, and those lots exist. Those lots don't tend to be what I'll call estate-sized lots. They tend to be rather small.
The 50-footers.
50 foot, some of them are 70 foot. You really don't see anything bigger than that. And when you start putting the 10 and 7.5 and sometimes 5 foot setbacks, depending on the lot width, it only leaves you a small amount of room to grade and to adjust.
Yeah, okay.
And that's why each of these solutions almost has to be a one-off, and you can't just come up with some specific standards and have everyone apply to the standard.
Well, I'm okay with the building part. I think on the planning part, I'm not saying I'm not okay, but I'd like to understand it more, not today.
And this is kind of how that breaks down. I've got
Right.
one more slide. But the admin positions, the inspectors, and half of the engineering position would be the $470,000 that would come out of the building permit fee fund, and out of the planning and zoning side would be the planning position and half of the engineering position.
Right.
I had this thing shut off.
So you were saying it has to be broken up half and half because the codes are not in the building side. What if we shifted
Right.
more of that language into the building side?
I was going to say that.
It doesn't necessarily work that way. I have tried to split this baby many times, and Audrey is one of the people I have used to figure out what I can do and what I can't do. You have to be very careful how you do this, and it goes back many years. The reason why you can only charge for a building permit fee how much it costs to enforce the Florida Building Code is because it was basically used as a deterrent for some sorts of permits. It was also used as a very easy revenue source in the past.
What about kind of doing it where you create something in the land development code or something that is code that says if it's an infill lot, that you have to do certain things, and you give them choice A, B, and C, and then do it in such a way that it does bring in, that Pete, through building inspection, can look at that in the plan review and force the homeowner to spend the money with an engineer to get it designed to meet that.
We have updated what's required in terms of a submittal. We've also, in terms of how it's being reviewed and who's looking at it, we are looking at from a lot more of a stormwater and also from a FEMA perspective. So there's a lot more data that's coming in with these applications. But it's not, there's a portion of all of these that is strictly building code, and there's a portion of that that is zoning, essentially.
I guess all I'm saying is maybe we can add more stuff in our rules and regulations and building code that they got to follow that shifts more of the bill being paid out of building inspection than out of community development as a goal.
Your attorney has a comment.
It's probably better to look at what the statute says you cannot use the money for
Yeah.
than try to figure this out, because a lot of governments have tried this, and there is an abundance of Attorney General opinions interpreting the statute as 55380, going through what you can and cannot do. So, I mean, I can give you the portion of the statute that says thou shalt not use the money for X, Y, and Z. And we do try to go as far as we can with spending the money whenever possible through building permit fees. In fact, I sent something to the city manager just about 2 weeks ago saying, aha, I think I know something we can spend some money on. So anytime I can figure out something that is legitimate, I throw it in right away.
John, how many, are you done, Fred? I'm sorry. You done?
I'm done.
Okay. Just a question on planning and zoning with this engineer. How many engineers do we have now in planning and zoning?
2. We started off with 1. We hired a second that was recently graduated. She then passed her PE, so now we have 2 licensed engineers.
Well, I guess my question, going kind of back to Peter, is, you know, and we all know how people interact and how we team-based everything. There's no way you can sit here and tell me that that person's only going to do 50% of the building department and 50% of this. Why can't we just hire it in the building department and other duties as assigned? Hey, this month, they're backed up. You need to go out and help out in the planning and zoning. But their essential task is in the building department doing the engineering for that. Now, we get busy, just like we'll use neighborhood services, or even Nicole. All those. The directors may have to go out and help out, pitch in. Why can't we use that same auspice or umbrella for this engineer?
To a certain extent, we do, but the building department has specific licenses for their inspections and also for their plan review. And without those licenses, you can't perform that building code review. Now, as an engineer, you obviously have the knowledge, but that's not your area of expertise. So that's where we run into a little bit of trouble. Currently, both engineers are split in terms of their time. So we're looking to set up any possible new engineering positions the same way we've got the existing engineering positions. This is the best we have been able to accomplish so far in terms of the 50-50. Yes, in terms of practice, they fill in where they're needed.
Saying is, let's hire this engineer, take it out of the building department fund, and if they happen to go out and help out in the planning and zoning, so what? We got overwhelmed that week. I mean, it's no different than, I'm not a training officer, but I've been out in the training development and trained.
If we can justify that and are told that can be done, I'm more than happy to do it. But rule number 1 is we don't serve time. So we've got to be able to justify whatever we're doing.
No, that's what I'm saying. I mean, obviously, in the building department, if you think that you need an engineer, you can't say I only need an engineer part-time. So we need an engineer. Now, if that engineer has to go out into the field for something for a day, then so be it. It's no different than if you've got to go out in the field. Or, I mean, let's say the inspectors, they're being paid by the building department. If they happen to have the certifications to help out in planning and zoning, you refunding them? I'm sure you're not refunding the building.
If we can justify that funding source, I'm happy to do it. Because I think it makes everyone's life
Well, let me ask it the
easier.
wrong way, and Greg will have fun with this. This isn't a union position.
That's what I was getting at.
Right, so you don't have to.
That's why it says other
You
duties
can't-
as assigned.
Exactly.
But I think, I mean, the logical thing is that you keep track of the kind of work that each of these people do and have to justify that this is, planning, at the end. I don't know if they do time stamps or whatever, but you at least know what project they're working on, so you'd have to, to be legal about it, you'd have to just, so it might turn out it's 75-25 or,
Well, just as a starting point for today, we feel very comfortable with justifying this breakdown. I can look to see if there is not a way that skews that, if not entirely over to the building side, more so. But that comes from an opinion from someone other than me.
John, when somebody submits a set of plans to build a house infill. Does Pete, building inspection, do they require that the plans be sealed with an architect and an engineer, or just an architect?
It's generally just either or, because we've had both. And we also have, what we see most of are single-family houses in newer communities. So the Valencia project, Bonita National, those projects tend to get the bulk of our single-family work. But big projects never scare me. Big projects are easy. They're master planned, they're designed to current standards. Those are simple. It's the smaller projects that you see in these older areas. So we may only get 5 or 6 of these single-family permits a month, but each one of them takes more time than all of the other permits in terms of review and also in terms of inspection and work out in the field. Because it's not just the formal inspections that are necessary. It's going out there on a regular basis to make sure there's not damage being done, make sure there's not an impact. I found that silt fence down that had just happened the day before, so we had to send somebody out there to have them fix that silt fence because the storms don't stop this time of year.
Focusing more on the planning side, do we have any quality metrics in regard to responsiveness of the planning and zoning department to request? I mean, has that been stable, or is it deteriorating? Or because I tangentially have heard there's some issues.
It's relatively
long delays in getting responses, or I don't know if it's responses, but getting it through the system. Do we have any metrics there?
Yes, ma'am. We do reporting basically every month, and I can provide you monthly, quarterly reports going back as far as you
So
want.
what's the answer? Is it stable, or getting worse, or getting better, or what? Or
Zoning
are we
applications for public hearings are erratic. We could have 3 one month, we could have none for 2 months, and we could have 7 the following month. So it's kind of hard to say if there's a real pattern there. I would say the numbers are probably down a little bit, and I think that's mainly due to the amount of large vacant land that's available. I think what we're starting to transition into are a larger number of small applications.
And those wouldn't have to go to public hearing, right?
Those could be anything. Some of those.
And those are the ones that are sort of lagging, or no?
Yes, ma'am. Those are also the ones that tend to be much more difficult because most of our easy property has been developed. We are now into the property that is vacant for a reason.
So this planner, extra planner, and engineer you see working on those kinds of projects pretty much? I mean, that's why
see
you're
them,
requesting this?
Yes, ma'am. It's not only that, but it's also the planning involvement into a lot of these engineering and building applications. Because a lot of the things that we talk about when a project comes through for your approval needs to make sure that those conditions are carried out in the way that you wanted when it comes into the engineering and also into the building permit. And right now, it has been the numbers have not really been a problem, so coordination was a little bit easier. Now, over the past year or so, with the volume of engineering projects coming in rising, it's been more challenging to make sure that coordination is there.
Okay.
Number one, we've said that these small infill lot things take 3 and 4 times what new construction and a development. The reason it is if you have a development or even a project like is going to come in front of us on the Terry Street Assemblage, whatever you call it, as part of the approval process, a stormwater management engineer has to engineer that whole thing so it drains. Now, we're letting off a guy that's going to build an infill house, and we're saying, city's going to do it. We're going to figure it out for them. And you know what? If our idea doesn't work, I think we have some culpability. I think we should fix it so that if you're doing an infill, there's got to be an engineered drainage plan for the lot, and it's got to meet this, this, and this, and that would then reduce the amount of time. I'm not against your request. I just think that we should.
What do you think about that, John?
Well, that's generally what's done. What we're doing, and I'll go back to this picture I was showing, is I've got an engineer that's usually out here probably about once a week, but everything that he's discussing with his contractor is now going to go into essentially what's known as an as-built plan at the very end that reflects all of the changes. So it will be part of their request.
Yeah, but we're the ones that. All I'm saying is,
correct.
If they did the work more up front that we're doing, our review time would be less.
Like a developer would.
Yeah, and it would also be a good thing because if the design is bad, then it's that engineer that put his seal on that drawing that you can go after, as opposed to the fact that we kind of helped them out and there wasn't a sealed drawing on that part of it. That's what, for whatever. Now, I have no problem with the request anyway, but I think we're really, that's something we should do.
What do you think of that, John?
My instructions to basically all of our staff are provide alternatives, provide thoughts, but you are not the designer. Almost everyone that I have in the department used to be a consultant. So they understand how to solve the problem, how to fix it. That's kind of how they're wired. So I have tried to focus them more on providing somebody the concern, providing them some alternatives, but it is not your design, it is not your project. Whatever solution is chosen needs to be chosen by the property owner, the applicant. It needs to be shown in their plan. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying, Councilman Forbes. We'll go out there and we'll work with, the contractor will say, well, I've got a problem here. For some reason this corner is not draining right. And so the engineer will say, well, have you thought about the following things? Contractor will choose whichever alternative, if he wants any of those, or come up with his own, but then that improvement will be shown on their plans at the end. So that way it will still be something that is part of their permit request and something that will have to be there as they go on.
But I think the question was, before you get to the point where you find there's a problem, when somebody has an individual development order submitted to you, or application, do they submit an engineer's report in regard to how the drainage is going to be taken care of? Or do they just say, we want to build a house, 3 feet off the ground?
Single-family permits require a certain amount of description in terms of drainage, but it does not tend to be to the same level that you would see in an engineering request.
So do you think it'd be useful to alter those requirements?
We've already started.
All right, and so we need to do it in a different way where the responsibility goes back to the person who's proposing.
The responsibility has not changed.
Right, but it has changed. It hasn't changed, but the city is more involved in saying, you've made some mistakes here. So should we do it earlier, before they build the thing and then they have the runoff problem? Should we get somebody that attests to the fact that they've considered all these possibilities earlier?
In terms of what we're requesting and what's being reviewed, we are always looking for ways to handle that better. I think that what we've requested in terms of cross sections, because if you just look strictly at the building code, there really, other than the fact it says to handle your drainage and not to flood your neighbors, there really isn't much there. So when you look at our land development code chapters, it starts talking about alternatives on how you can handle drainage. But what it doesn't do is state, here's your air conditioning pad, at what point do you handle, or how do you handle the runoff along that section of the property? So some of those things that you can see, and we do see, and we handle at the plan review stage, some of these things that you just really don't see until you start to see the erosion on the property as the house is under construction.
You can't determine that a priori?
You can address.
Wouldn't an engineer know that he has to consider where the air conditioning pad is?
You can address a good portion of all of these issues at plan review, but you're still going to have issues during construction that you just either didn't anticipate or just didn't work out the way that you would have hoped for or designed.
Last point. If an engineer has to design it, put a seal on it, that seal has got a lot of years of liability. If the builder does it, that liability lasts, if you're lucky, about a year or so. And we may not have a major storm event that would cause a problem for a couple of years. So that's one of the reasons I think that on this area that we ought to require that if it's an infill single family, or say it's a duplex on an infill lot, that it's got to have a storm water design plan that meets our requirements. And for no other reason, and so you give that property owner that's putting all that money in that a lot of years of liability that he can at least go back after the engineer. A lot of times the contractors are out of business, they move out of state, whatever. That's the way it is, unfortunately.
Can I make a suggestion on this thing, which is, I'm sure you've thought about as much as you can, how much you can put into the building fund. I'm sure you thought about that, but could we just take Greg's suggestion of possibly relooking at putting the job there and as appropriate, as Amy says, allocate hours as opposed to just half of it through the year, and then look at Fred's idea, which is more of a change in the code type. Or maybe it's not the code, maybe it's just the practice.
Let me see what we can justify, because
Yeah.
if we can come up with a way that shifts some of this financial impact over to the building permit fee,
As appropriate.
of course.
Right.
I have no issues with that, and I know that actually it makes everyone's life a little bit easier.
Right.
Yeah, I think one other thing, to speaking of what Audrey raised, and that is the reason that we, I believe, can require some of these things, like an engineer will seal a stormwater drainage for a single-family lot on an infill, is because this area, like it or not, is prone to flood.
Right.
We saw a perfect example of it in Irma. And when you rode out through some of these developments, even the old ones in Pinecrest, you saw the older homes here and the newer ones that were built later up here.
Right.
So it's a problem, even in the existing developments. So anyway, case rest. I think we ought to look at it, seriously.
But on the other item on the planning and zoning, I prefer to just punt on that for a week and get some more background from Arlene and community development on that, the non-building fund job. If that's all right with people.
And we did want to also make sure that the council was aware there was a reflection in the staff's proposed budget for the contract increase, which is approximately 2.4%. That is reflected in here in both the building side and the planning side.
It's reflected in this, but not with the person.
Not with the person,
Right.
no. The person,
Yeah.
no, any of the general fund costs are not reflected in this budget.
I think you can support that, excluding this other issue, for another reason. The tendency is going to be, I think, that in zoning and projects, we want to see more of what you're going to do up front, including drainage as part of the zoning. So all that's going to require extra manpower anyway.
That's part of it, but because
Yeah.
there's nothing concrete,
Right.
there's nothing to...
Thank you. To move on to, we wanted to get some direction from council. In this current budget, we have not included a line item for the Sister City. It's a brand-new program. And we wanted to get some direction from council, whether they see that they'd like to have appropriation for that as well in the general fund, or what the thoughts were behind the program and in planning that into council's vision for that.
I wasn't aware that it required funding when we talked about it.
It does not. That's why it's not, we just wanted to get some direction. Is there any future programming that you all thought would be involved in that? Is there some sort of, I think at one point they talked about where they had come over to visit us, and was there some sort of idea that there would be reciprocal visits or continuing visits, or if there's any thought of the program? We just wanted to make sure that we do have the program, that it is not funded in this requested budget. We wanted direction from council on that.
He just won his re-election, by the way, too, July 1st.
You know,
Not
Mike,
that that matters,
I
but
don't know what you have on the list here.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think it would be good to know if there's anybody's suggestion as to a number, but in my view, it's good you have this, bringing it up, but it's all out of context to me, because, you know, we've been told we have 0 reserves. It looks like 787,000 or something like that. 5 million out of the general fund. We haven't, and I'm not saying you should have previously, talked about where we are and all the other expenditures. So it's kind of like, it's just kind of out there, you know, as by itself without being in a context.
Well, we could continue. On the 16th, we're going to have other items that have been
That's what
brought
I'm
up along
saying.
the way, so we can.
Yeah. I think it'd be just, if
We can
anybody
defer
is
it for the
suggesting
16th.
it, and they have a number, I think we should talk about it, in my view, but in the context of everything else. I don't know, does that make sense? I guess so.
Yeah.
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, not anything, but in a way, right now, each item's in a vacuum,
Right.
right?
Yeah, it's just-
Until you
yeah,
see the
right.
It's a big picture.
glazed over big picture.
Exactly.
And I'm sorry, I missed it. But we did have, Nicole was not able to be here on the 16th, so I've asked her to just give a very high-level, brief overview of her cost center,
Oh, all right.
and in case there's any specific questions. And then if there's something that comes up on the 16th, we'll get that information back to you as well.
Yes, I apologize, I will not be here on the 16th, and not available by phone, unfortunately. So this is the Parks and Recreation budget in terms of detail. I know last year we did look at if something was way off, under or over, that those were kind of the things that were highlighted. So I'm not sure exactly how you want to do it this time. I did try to keep the numbers as close to this year as I possibly could.
Is there a page number or
Where are
anything?
you?
50 to 58.
58?
That's, the summary is 58.
And the general fund.
I believe it starts with cost center 601.
Summary?
65 would be the,
65?
Page 60.
65 would be
65.
the numbers.
65?
There we go, finally.
Can I ask maybe this is more first for Ann for
Sure.
context. So, I'm looking for like a definition of the original budget. Maybe it's not even showing here. In other words, I have what was the original draft, not for Nicole, but for the entire expenditure from last year's original budget book. And it had an original, for example, an original operating expenditure requested budget of $8,000,002. This is this is on, well, you don't have it with you, but it's page 29 of last year's budget. And so this goes to like, what are we comparing, right? So this year's budget book on page 15 shows that $8,000,002 at $13,000,007. That's on page 15, if I'm reading it right. Original budget. So my question is that, what does original mean there? Is that original, is that like got the hurricane in it, or what?
That's the original adopted budget.
Original adopted budget?
It would be in this book.
All right. That's interesting. So we went, well, I'll take that offline then. We went up $5 million between the original book and the final book, but maybe, I may be misreading it. So, but original means what was in the September 30th. It was the adopted budget for the year.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. And expected simply is what's expected.
Was expected, and which in this year's book became the actual. Because we've updated the FY17 actual in this notebook. But look
Well,
at
17 would be actual, right.
Right.
But
Last
the
year's
year
was
we're in
expected.
is expected by
Right.
definition, right? That's helpful, thanks. So back on Nicole's page 65, just to pick a number off the top, regular wages, the budget was 372. The expected is $8,000 more. Is that the way to understand it? On page 65, Ann?
Yep.
So I'm just picking a line item out, the first one. So the original was 372,
Right,
expected is 380,
right.
requested is 383, and then we're comparing it to the expected.
The original budget does not include the allocation of the pay for performance. in the.
Well, I'm not questioning the
department.
difference, I'm just
Okay.
trying to understand the
Just wanted to-
concepts, that's
okay.
all. Okay, all right, thank you.
And the reason for that large difference is we were splitting out in 601 and 602, those cost centers, some park staff were in 602 and some were in 601, and we
Right.
had to split them.
I'm
So
not
now-
question- I'm
okay,
not questioning it. I
perfect.
just want to understand and define what we're
Yes.
playing with, that's all. So,
I've got a question
Right.
on page 65, the cleaning of facilities,
Mm-hmm.
$21 million?
21 million,
What is that?
21,000.
We're at, we have cleaning,
21,000,
Yes.
my mistake.
Oh.
No more questions.
You want to get in that business?
Yeah, no,
Whoa.
totally obviously looked at it wrong. Thank you.
I need to be in that business.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Nicole, I interrupted you. You were saying.
No,
you were saying-
absolutely. The numbers that we are looking at, again, most of these, a lot of them actually are contracted, such as cleaning of facilities. We do contract the rec center cleaning through Jam Pro. That is a monthly fee that we've contracted through them. And a lot of the stuff that we have is contracted. So I don't know if you want me to go line by line or you have specific questions. So that way we can be high level instead of getting into the weeds, but.
I think what.
Well, and my only question is, and it's macro, is why are we comparing just to expected as opposed to what we budgeted last year? In other words, forget about Nicole in the Parks Department, but it's like, well, this is what we budgeted for, and, you know, maybe somebody blew out a budget for some good reason, and now what we're doing is we're comparing it to what that bigger number is, at least the way I'm reading this, and say, oh, well, it's actually maybe a reduction or maybe a small increase, but it could be a big increase versus the original. And it could work the other way, too.
Right.
Yeah.
And we can change those.
Well, it's a lot of work, but,
That was, I thought, a previous discussion we had about, from a comparison standpoint. but
so what did we decide previously? Are we going to compare it to the actual year?
Yes,
That's what
there
we
was a
decided last
desire
year.
to compare it to real,
Right.
actual dollars.
So that's why that last column is there
That's correct.
versus 17. Okay.
You had asked for that.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
I understand. Well, I was trying to get to a realistic comparisons.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's why the other number's not there, because,
Right.
you know, we switched to that when you
We
brought it up.
switched to that. Okay, thank you.
Do we have in our planning such things that, and this is a common problem that happens, and that is, take a facility, I don't know, how old is the rec center?
It was built in 1996, so 22 years old.
1996. So have we really done a real update and facelift to that building and fixed everything that's wrong with it, or we just kind of like fix the roof one year and?
Correct, that's what we do. We've been piecemealing it. We have looked at, there was the expansion project that we looked at, but we ended up not doing it. So everything has been complete piecemeal at this point, just due to
Well,
cost and other priorities.
I think there's merit to looking at,
It's actually here, but not on the individual.
I don't know whether it's going to be 20-year intervals or what, but there's a period at which a building that's built for public use and all that needs a lot of upgrades and changes. Sometimes it's ADA. I think we ought to be putting that in our plan. I'm not suggesting this year, but I think that's something that we ought to be looking at. It's kind of like Greg's point on this building. When it was remodeled into City Hall from, I guess it used to be a bank, that's pretty well was the big deal, and then now it's just a little Band-Aid here and Band-Aid there. And that's not really the way to keep the city and the facilities that are used a lot by our people up to snuff, so to speak.
So Nicole and I have been discussing utilizing some of the urban design funds that we have to get a high-level look at the facilities, including the ball fields, the soccer fields. We've also heard there's an interest in acquiring additional soccer fields, but do a high-level look at how to make our facilities updated, ADA accessible, but also aesthetically pleasing and user-friendly, to be able to create some long-range plans for that.
Right.
And then at that point, we'd have to come back with a proposal of how we would fund those with a combination of grant funds and if there's a possibility of
Yep.
grant funds
And some can be
so
park
we'd like
impact
to
fees.
probably work with doing a high-level view of the facilities and seeing short-term and midterm and long-range goals for those.
Right, with a CIP plan.
With CIP
Yeah.
plan.
I think the fire district, Greg's can testify this, I think that's one of the things they really do well is they look at facilities and the older stations, they update and all that. In fact, they just tore one down and built a new one because it was so messed up, I guess was the right word for it.
So I think we'd be looking to do a request for proposals for, or look within our approved planning
List.
park
Yep.
facilities to look at an architect and engineer to help us with that, but also keeping the design standards in effect as well.
So Nicole, I finally found the number I was looking for here.
Okay.
It's actually on page 16, you don't have to turn there, but it actually has the original budget, what I was just talking about, just a macro number of last year, and then it has the actual from the prior year. So it shows the requested budget being 60,000, on a base of 2 million,
Yes.
60,000 more. So maybe you just talk about that, I mean.
Well, it is in a range of all different cost centers,
Right.
because some of the cost centers have gone down, some have gone up. In terms of, a lot of it is, we didn't do any of the capital improvement projects this year, just due to all the things that we need to do with Irma. So we have pushed those off. But we do have some smaller capital outlays on here, which can change the numbers. But typically, most of that 60,000 difference is actually, a lot of it is staffing, because there was an increase in health insurance, all of those things. So a lot of that number is, I mean, that would be the bulk of the number. The rest of it would be random splits between several, such as in 603, there is an increase in tree trimming service because of Irma. We've had some other dead trees that we've now found, so we've contracted that out, so there's an increase there. We have increases such as at the pool, there's a $2,300 increase for a new pump impeller, so there are small numbers that add up. There isn't really one giant number that comes up to that $60,000 number.
But like you said, so the health is 31,000.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's where the big number's coming in.
Nicole,
Yes.
we're supposed to add all these numbers together, get a total expenditure for the park, right?
There is actually,
Page
it's
16.
on
Total?
page,
Page 16.
We're on page 16?
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, Ann
I see
already
it.
has
I
added
see
them
it.
up.
Okay. So basically, it's $2 million for our parks.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
And that stayed pretty steady throughout the years.
Yeah, I understand.
And how many employees are there for your department?
Total, I mean, we have some that are part-time, so it's 19 total.
And how many full-time?
It would be, there are 4, I have to count them. We have, in parks and admin 601, we have 9. At the rec center, we have 4, I believe. And then at the pool, I have 3.
Full-time?
Yes. 3 full-time at the pool, 4 full-time at the rec center, and 9 full-time park maintenance.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Page 60.
Audrey?
Yes, sir.
I know you're not standing there, but question for you. Should we discuss Cullum's Trail or leave that alone right now? Based on a meeting you and I had right before the 4th with Carter Pritchett?
Oh, thank you, that took me a while.
No, yeah, no, that's okay. Can we discuss that, or Matt, you know what I mean? That was where I was going before the 4th, but if now's not the time to
Or we can get briefs done.
If you wish to make additional improvements to that project, just for council's edification,
As long as it,
a property owner came up to
Yeah.
you and expressed interest in potentially doing some rezoning of property, and then maybe something that could be a win-win type situation that could occur, whether you want to put money in the budget for additional enhancements to Collins Trail.
Right.
That's up to you.
Thank you.
What kind of money?
Just additional boardwalk.
I mean, are we talking 50 grand, 100 grand,
Well, it would,
25,000?
I thought we had a project that was on the books there to finish up
Don't
something.
we have that on the CIP?
in terms, I can discuss this a little bit. In terms of Cullum's Trail, to get to the property they're discussing, it is working with FDOT and getting under I-75.
So we got that done.
That has changed in their opinion as to whether they'll allow us to do that or not. We have spent funding to try to look at that, but since then, there has been a change in staffing at FDOT. So we had one group saying, yes, we think it's a good idea. Now we have a new group kind of saying, no, resubmit all of your plans and we'll take a look at it again. So that's kind of where we're at in the Cullum's Trail before we even get to that.
Is that District
portion.
1?
It would be.
Is it our local district?
Yes.
Well, I'd be happy to get
Yeah.
involved.
You might, you could characterize this as expansion of Carpenter Trail. This would be so that you wouldn't get into
connect the two.
I-75.
Right, but then it wouldn't be connecting to Cullum's.
Peter, if you want, I'll talk offline with Nicole or whomever,
Yeah.
Eileen, about that. and
Yep.
Maybe we'll go to
Sure.
the District 1.
So,
Yeah, we can discuss that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
But there are some other logistical issues too in terms of height problems.
We'll just raise the bridge.
no, I was just gonna say, so Nicole, here we
Yeah,
are
raise the
firing
road.
questions at you. Do you wanna fire any at us for things maybe that we're not thinking about, or asking things we ought to be thinking about? You know, I don't know, whatever, kitchen sink, anything you,
No, that was the big one, and actually Councilwoman Forbes brought up, was that Arlene and I are working to try to come up with a more consistent design for all of our parks.
right.
As well as getting a plan together for enhancements. At this point, we are needing enhancements of the rec center, we are needing enhancements of the baseball fields. Marnie Fields were a little restricted, actually a lot restricted, due to the power lines not allowing us to build a permanent structure.
Right.
Because of course, we would love to have lights and additional concession stands and restrooms. But that's where, you know, we are coming up with, maybe we look at building additional soccer facilities somewhere else, where we can add those things into the facility. So that's the big one that we really want to look at, is how we can enhance all of our park system.
That is one question.
Right.
You can't build a permanent structure at Marnie Fields.
Correct.
If you build a little, I don't know, 15 by 15 building, whatever, and it's on wheels and it moves,
You
is
can
that
do-
allowed?
Yep, if it moves, you're allowed.
Because I have heard from a lot of folks, any kind of a building there, even if it's on wheels, no plumbing obviously,
Right.
but, so I don't know how council feels about that, but I'll just, if we can maybe add that to our list for discussion.
Change
Pelican
the-
Landing, just coincidentally, put in a mobile rest station at our marina, and it's pretty nice. I mean, it's like one of these luxury kinds of ones. I can't remember the cost of it, but it wasn't horrible. And it's on wheels because we're not allowed to,
Right.
and it's been in
They do
about a year.
have portable,
It's a portable- it's like a-
restroom stations that you can use, and they are
You could
actually
rent
quite
them
nice.
for functions and
Yes.
parks and things. And I mean, it's just as good as a permanent one. It's interesting.
Right.
And so when you have an event like Irma, we're required to take it away from
Right.
the marina
Yep.
and put it, I don't know where we're putting it, but they have a place where they can park it.
We've
It's-
also looked into portable lighting. It has been quite expensive in terms of cost, because we looked at renting it for short periods of time instead of purchasing it, but that's something that could be a possibility as well.
And is there any possibility to revisit with FPL if we could put a somewhat
They don't allow that in any
in
right-of-ways.
anyone, so it's just a standard policy, okay.
Just because in an emergency situation, I mean, we did have some issues with Marnie Fields getting additional damage because they had to drive through those flooded fields to fix the power lines. So that did cause additional damage than just the flooding.
Okay.
And they don't want anything in their way. And I don't blame them, we do want
Well,
electricity.
it makes sense.
So that's why it does make sense if we could look at building fields elsewhere where we could
Is
actually
River
build
Park,
a new
I
facility.
had a brief chat with Arlene about this, just literally 10 seconds. Is River Park an option?
For
Soccer?
At this point, it's not, just due to the environmental sensitivity of the area. We do have some pretty restrictive permitting on that. So it's not, and it was actually purchased with TDC funds.
Right.
So we would have to go back to them, but to change the
It
development
just
order.
strikes me as one of the most underutilized areas that we have,
Mhm.
River Park.
It
And I
would
know,
be,
I mean, I know there are environmental issues, but
yeah,
I don't know what they are, and I'm not saying we should discuss it here today.
sure.
But, I mean, what could be more placid than an open playing field? I mean, gee.
Maybe we can get some ideas of what are allowable
Yeah.
uses.
Mhm.
Right.
And if it's
Start
not just
there.
soccer, it could be something else to make it
Sure.
more utilized that are allowed there with the
Yeah.
environmental impacts and bring back some information on that.
absolutely.
Going to what the mayor said about wheels, you could probably get something on wheels with regular toilets and regular water and sewer, and you could just have stub-ups where the trailer would drive up to them and hook into them so that you really wouldn't have the beautiful smelling porta potties and all that. And that wouldn't be that expensive. You'd have a meter there so that BSU could get their water usage paid for and all that, and sewage. But you could do that in any of these places.
The only thing I want to add is I wanted to thank Arlene and Nicole. We've made a lot of progress very quickly here on the baseball fields, and more to come. And I think that is an idea, that design idea which we talked about, that should be built in, once again, longer-term capital plan, but maybe we get some private funding, it becomes a short-term capital plan. And I would feel the same way about the soccer. In other words, I would default to put it in the longer term, and then we got to think about the funding. So at least we have it on our radar, whatever it is.
Absolutely. Any other questions for me?
And then as you review this, if there's more questions, if you
Yeah.
want to email us, let us know, and
Yes,
then Nicole will be
absolutely.
able to help get us any other information we need in between.
Right.
Yeah, if you have
Council,
any-
anything else for Nicole? For
No.
Nicole, anything else for us?
I don't think so.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank
Thank you.
Not to keep anything in a vacuum, I want to be respectful of that as well, but these reminding items, we did give you a supplement on. These are requests that the public has made for us to consider whether those requests were sent directly to the mayor. Some of them were sent to all of you. We wanted to make sure we recognized and have an opportunity for you all to discuss them, just to see what direction you'd like to go.
Is this in the addendum, Arlene?
This is the addendum, yes. And you'll see there's emails that were provided where correspondence happened from the general public. I do know, as far as the skate park, I believe all of council received emails from Mr. Pano. The only budget, actually, there's no budget change proposal. We have $175,000 that would be carried over in the capital improvements project line items into this year. We're not proposing any additional funds. Mr. Pano has said that he was interested in helping work to find grant funds to make a larger, as we know, the $175,000 didn't get us a very large skate park. Mr. Pano's also suggested there's different types of facilities that add to a skate park, a bump park, and there's trails that you build around. And there is a national firm that has a grant program, which you have a copy of that as well, Staff would just be looking to coordinate grant efforts, but not looking to increase the dollar amount provided.
What could be wrong with that?
And that would include leaving, at this point, leaving the skate park at its current location that the council decided to do.
So the idea would be that we could, if this worked, we could build a bigger skate park than this little.
Yes, and we're hearing there's also more alternative to skate park where people go longer ranges and they go around. And so we'd have to look at our facilities, the property we have, and what that means
Oh, space-wise?
space-wise. I think Nicole.
Back again.
Back again.
What we actually looked at originally for the 175 was a 4,000 square foot concrete skate park. And I have been in discussions with several different skate park companies that there is a new system out where you can build smaller concrete parks and then build what's called a pump track around it. Most pump tracks are used for bikes typically. You can use skateboards, but a lot used for bikes. And then inside the pump track, you would have the actual concrete park. So that way it does cut down on the cost. Our space we have 20,000 square feet currently, so we have a lot of space. John Pano was actually looking at about a 15,000 square foot. I did let him know the cost estimates on that, and he's scaled down a little bit because that is about $800,000 if you did that. But we can do smaller concrete park and then the pump tracks, and it can be at a much cheaper cost.
So we would be looking at what the current trends are with these as well, what other communities are doing,
Right.
and then seeing what grant opportunities they come. But our base point would be the $175,000, which is already in the budget as in this proposed to carry over into this fiscal year.
And just so you are all aware, the current skate park is completely been removed. The damage, once Hurricane Irma hit it, there wasn't anything that was salvageable. So right now it is a big empty space.
Weren't we getting insurance money for the damage there?
We actually had too many issues and so much damage already that we didn't qualify for any
So we
insurance
didn't get
money.
anything, okay.
No, the only thing that we may get reimbursed for is the removal, which was $4,000 from FEMA. And that's a maybe. We're hoping.
But each one of these things that are suggested have different requirements, is that correct, if I'm reading this correctly?
Correct, that Mr. Pano sent.
So that if we wanted to, we'd have to see if we qualify, first of all?
Correct.
And what the time frame was it? And we still have the 175 in the capital
Yes.
improvement
Yes.
budget. So
Yep.
are we planning to go forward with that in 2019?
Well, at this point, we were just carrying the money over,
Mhm.
and if we did find additional grant funding and different grants, that we could build something bigger.
So 175 is not adequate to do what we planned, or it is?
It is adequate to do the 4,000 square foot as
So what it
planned.
would require is maybe starting up with that modest thing and seeing if at the same time we could integrate this, because if we're going to start up in 2019, would we disqualify ourselves for these grants?
We could possibly, because a lot of them are looking at building a new park, not adding to an additional one. The Tony Hawk Foundation, a lot of that money is just for design. It's not for actually building it. You have to look for outside funds to build it. the
And it
Tony
has to
Hawk
be in an
Foundation.
underserved area, so where we have it, is that an underserved
Yes,
area?
we do.
Yes, we
We
do qualify for
So
that.
it seems to me, and I don't know how long it takes to get these grants, but we could try to get the design go. Do we have a design, or we're just going to?
We have a design for a 4,000 square foot park. It's, do we want to look at a bigger, larger type of park? And that's the grant we would be applying for Tony Hawk if we wanted them to pay for the design. But a lot of these companies, such as where I got the 4,000 square foot, they all do a design for you. If you tell them what you're looking for, and you can do an as-build, basically. So or a design build, so they'll build it for you as they design it.
So you don't really need the design phase?
Well, what we were hearing from the Tony Hawk portion of it is if you wanted to do something more, what they felt was more state-of-the-art with the pump tracks and adding to it, then that would be something we would be looking at to see where the available space is, how it doesn't take away or detract from the disc golf or the other programs that you have going on there and to see what works. So I think at this point, we were looking to still explore and maybe put a package together of what makes sense. But you still have the ability to just move forward with the 4,000 square foot. We were hearing that from the Tony Hawk Foundation with our population that we might want to look at something more creative than that, than just that, because that wasn't going to necessarily be the most state-of-the-art or what the current trends are.
Let me ask you this. If Tony Hawk, and it sounds like we've gotten to those questions with them, if they're making suggestions, and I'd hate to read into it that they're interested, but do you sense there's an interest there?
There is an interest in terms of them helping us with the design.
No, understood,
Yeah,
understood.
there is definitely an interest.
Meaning funding for the design.
Yes, but.
I understand.
yeah.
No, I get you.
Yes, there is a.
The design.
Yeah.
Tony Hawk
And
design, I
and
get
that
it.
was
but-
$25,000.
That was up to $25,000. So they are interested in that. We do need to apply, of course. This would be the first one in Florida. They've never built one in Florida before. So they are looking at branching out to different areas.
Well, what is this email says 250,000?
That was only if you're in Michigan or New York when we
Yep.
started
Oh.
investigating it.
They
yes.
actually
that was
do
for 20
fund
different
in
ones.
other states.
For what?
That was broken up against 20.
Oh. So,
What's the specialty, as a former resident of Michigan, but whatever, what's the specialty of New York and Michigan?
It was just part of their program
That was their
in
program.
those states. But
Oh. That's a lot
Is that
less money than I
discrimination?
thought. Skateboard.
Yeah, at this point, they're not looking
Skateboard
at
discrimination
limiting
based on
hours.
state? Wow.
Well, it's a lot less money than I thought then. So Mike's just showing me it's 25.
Yeah, the only amount of money would be for design and up to 25,000.
So
We
it'd be
would have-
25,000 for design if we get it?
Yes.
for that particular grant program.
Right,
There-
right, understood. Do they have anything, that would be it from them?
From them, but they had
Yes.
suggested there was other opportunities to apply for. We have to explore those. We don't know what those are.
Understood.
Well,
But
my
what
only-
I'm saying is, so it's hypothetical, of course, looking at nothing, don't even know what page we're looking at, but, all right, so let's say we've set aside 100,000, and then we get the $25,000 grant for the design, but the design is for 500,000. I mean, that's within the realm of possibility,
Yes.
right? Obviously, yeah, okay.
Yep.
So I'm back to, I think, where Amy was going. Will this end up slowing down
Yes.
what we're doing?
Yeah, that's the way, when I read this the
Yes.
first time, they sent this months ago, I read through all this stuff. I didn't read it as carefully with this one because this is not the full program. I went through the application and I thought, it didn't seem to suit us that well anyway. And if we really want to get something going, it seems like we should execute. But I'm intrigued by taking another look to see if our original concept is appropriate, and if at the same time we should incorporate this other thing is for bikes, like what kind of, like dirt
We've
bikes or
actually
something?
discussed, I've been meeting with different
Uh-huh.
skate park companies for a while, and we were even discussing doing a pump track at a later point after we built, because you
Right.
don't have to integrate them together.
Correct.
It actually goes around another skate park. So it's something where before we were looking at, oh, we'll keep the old one parts of it as long as we can and then build this over here.
Mhm.
Well, now what we can do is put something more in the center
Mhm.
and then build out around.
Mhm.
And that's what these pump tracks can do.
But you don't use skateboards, what are you using?
You
You
can,
do.
they're asphalt. You can. They're
you
just
get a
little
running start
hills
kinda?
that go like
Okay,
this.
but could
No,
you
it's-
prevent bikes from going on there?
No.
No, so we
No.
wouldn't prohibit that.
No.
It's just more inducive for bicycles and
Yes.
longboards, skateboards, things like that.
Than it is for, it's not really like a trick type park for
Mhm.
smaller boards.
I think what we're hearing is that the skate park as designed there is very specific for specific use. The
Correct.
pump track is more versatile, so you have different opportunities
Yes.
for use.
I saw something like that in Denver at one of the public parks, but it was for really little kids, and they had just little bumps, but the kids were having they had their little bikes, and that's how
Yeah.
they did it. I think that's what you mean. so
Right, and it makes
it's-
it more for all users
Right.
instead of just a certain population.
Can I ask Mike what you think? Because you've been interested in this.
Oh,
subject.
yeah, I mean, this is the way it's going, so I think we need to be on the forefront of it. You know, if we build something, we want to be cutting edge. We don't want to build, something that was so 10 years ago, so,
Especially if it's concrete.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, we understand that we don't want to take too much time away from the process, but maybe if you let us do a little bit of analysis of what other grants besides the Tony Hawk grant that we may be eligible for, and talk to Tony Hawk about how quickly something can be turned around with their design, because I understand they have some sort of unique ideas or designed features that may not be the cookie cutter that you'd receive from that. So I understand that those are built to form. There's a cookie cutter, you pick 4,000, 10,000, 15,000 square feet, and it's very patterned, where they look at sites and elevations and see what makes sense to be more creative, and bring back some ideas, and hopefully, during this process, we could start planning and seeing what grants are available, so we don't tie up the process. But we do always have the backup of moving back to the original plan. It's just that I think we're hearing that that's not the most state-of-the-art, and I don't know what the lifespan of that would be, especially when Nicole's been talking about the usage of that type of skate park, of how would we want something maybe more versatile.
You would definitely want to incorporate both a regular type skate park with the pump tracks, because if you didn't, it's not going to bring in the users. It would be the same as it was before, with pretty low turnout.
But we need the bigger than the 4,000 feet skate park, too.
Correct.
And to ask a somewhat obvious question, probably very straightforward, if we're approved for this $25,000 grant for design, we have to use that design, right? Or is it, I'm splitting hairs, but right? You have to use that design.
Yeah, they have engineers and things that they work with, so you would have to use their, and we have said they would have to be licensed in Florida, but they would work with engineers here. But yeah, we can't
say thank you for the $25,000
Correct.
for design work. Your design looks great, but we found something over here we like better.
I think we can look into all of that, right?
I think we need to explore all what that means. For example, if there was a proposal back from them and it was 500,000, obviously out of our budget, then we'd have to be able to discuss that and give them some terms. So we'll need to look into that, what the restrictions are of the funding.
Yeah. No, and not to pick on Michigan and New York, they've got, seems like they're a little well established in those areas. If they've done this, it sounds like, but they've never done it in Florida. So
But this is basically a small grant. There's elements of tail wagging a dog here.
Right, exactly.
Not that it's a bad thing, but. Next one, are we?
The next one is the mayor received a request and regarding landscaping improvements on 041 from a resident, and from what I understand from Public Works, in the past, there had been looked at the landscaping program to continue in those medians, and what the resident is discussing is that they understood when the widening project happened that there would be landscape medians to assist with noise, and so this was a request given to the mayor, and the mayor asked that we
actually had this in, and then when we did, my recollection is, and when we did our work to reorder our capital projects, we pushed some of that stuff aside. Yeah. I mean, to me, this is a perfect example of what should be in the longer-term capital budget, along with a whole bunch of other landscaping projects. And then we see where we are financially, with the understanding, as Amy has pointed out, that our first priority is the flooding. It's not just this, there are other areas as well. And I would list them all and get them in there, but get them out, get them in the out years. And then if money opens up, money opens up. Does that make sense, Peter?
It makes sense to me.
Amy, you?
No, it's good. My only question about this is like west of East Terry, pretty much.
This is the northern part of.
This is the northern part of 041.
Northern part of 041.
By Burnwood and that, right.
But is there any development that's going in there? I mean, like, I see some.
It's all done, right?
We wanted to.
Except for
it's all
across
done.
the way,
Except for
the
Nicola's.
west side.
Nicola's is.
This is a little bit more north of that even.
It's even north of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all for it, but we were prioritizing stuff, and that's before the hurricane.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I think Peter and I were the two guys most pushing for a landscape.
Did we ever have a plan for it?
Sure.
Matt?
Well, we had an
Was
idea.
it, no, it wasn't designed at all?
We didn't have a design plan, but it was plan in a capital improvements
Right.
line item for the future. So I think
The
what we need to do
Copy
is
Street,
look at all of the locations that need to be looked at and provide out-year plan for those as well.
Yeah, and I would do a whole bunch of them, not just this.
Right.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, on landscaping, a little deal I've been working on, and Irma kind of slid it off to the right.
Right.
There's interest of the people that live east of I-75 that they got pricing from the contractor that did the landscaping and the media on Bonita Beach Road out in front of Bonita National. And it was reasonably priced. My mind was it was either $150,000 or $200,000. They would replicate like a mile of that in front of a development. And I was trying to put a deal together where from, say, Village Walk all the way down to Grandy, and then hopefully with McGarvey, Horizon Park, and others, Burnwood, that they would all contribute into it. And I thought if we could get it for 200 grand a mile roughly, or whatever it was, that perhaps the city could pay a fraction of that. But they would maintain it, which is another
that's a
problem
fantastic
child
idea.
that comes with landscaping. But it
Fred-
would really dress up that
Right.
that stretch.
Looks
I
like a
think
bowling alley.
Councilman O'Flynn one time called it looked like a bowling alley.
Right.
Now, you said
With
the magic
gutters.
words there, which is maintenance, because one concern that I discussed with Matt and Arlene and Carl before him is that we have to be aware of how much this takes us to maintain this property, and that number is growing.
Nope.
Do you want to give us that number already? Is that we already maintain, I think it was $500,000-$600,000, isn't it?
It's more than that.
More than that.
More
All
than
right,
that.
so
It's
I
like
mean,
$1 million.
that's for any time we all love, I mean, I love plants as much as the next person, but we need to be certain that we don't have this variable cost that is actually a committed cost already, because there's nothing worse than something that is not maintained. You're better off
yeah.
having grass than having something that has weeds in it.
You mean grass that's not maintained?
Well, grass, grass, you can take a mower and it's done, you know?
When it's done.
So we need to have an awareness of where we're going with this.
Well, that's why I said in this.
No,
thing
that's a
up front-
perfect solution, you know?
Yeah.
Well, in
So-
Collier County, Fred, you probably know
Yeah.
this, Collier County has MSTUs where it's basically adopt a median. And I think if that's where we should be going, we should be going. But I understand the maintenance cost, but, you know, we're a city with a $10 billion assessed valuation, and we can either look more like our neighbors in Collier County, or we can look like nothing. And, you know, I think we've crossed that point. I agree on cost, but I'd rather figure out a way to do it,
Well, what is that number anyway? I mean, when you think of that as a percent. Pardon me?
It's about $1 million.
All right, so you were talking about 1/8 of our general fund revenue.
And
So-
but it was before the improvements were made on US 41, it was something like $800,000.
All right.
You know, so.
Okay, so I think for further discussion, but
We'll bring back,
Maybe look at
I'll
bigger
work, Matt and I will
overall.
work together and create an overall plan for all prioritized, and then when we can bring that back, you all can prioritize
Can you do that
them.
in 3 days?
No.
and if something were to happen, and I don't want to sound one way or another, looking down the road, if we were to come to some kind of a consensus on the council to designate X number of dollars for what we're looking at here around the city, I'd like to have much more oversight than when it happened 3 or 4 years ago.
Amen, brother.
Right?
Amen, brother.
I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
Okay. Great, thanks.
And there's a related thing, just a footnote here, which is Beach Road with our shells.
Right.
It's not our road, so turn the page.
Right. Okay, the next item.
So you all had received inquiries from a local realtor. I think you also received emails from residents regarding some potential purchase of riverfront property. We just provided that information to you so you can have further discussion on it as well. And I can combine that with, the mayor also received, and moving to the second one is just so you understand it's all property together, is that you received inquiries and requests for information regarding some property within the interchange as well. We just wanted to provide all of council the same information to be able to discuss.
On that one that we're talking about, I know when Arlene mentioned it to me, any of these things become much more workable if the property owner that's wanting to do something like this with us has got a, for lack of a better word, an option money down payment so that you can control the property, but then you've got a long time to get the money, because we don't, most of these things are conceptually great, except we're kind of cash poor, so we don't have the money to do it. But if we had a way where we can, they're willing to tie the thing up for a while we go out and beat the bushes, some of these things become much more workable.
Payment plan, so to speak.
Well, before we even get to that point, I'd have a better understanding of why we would be interested in these projects. You know, I know that the implication for the ones along the river is that we would have a continuous river park, and how that would be integrated with what we have and whether we really need it at the whole, whole 9 yards there. So there's a lot more information that I think we would need before we even consider that. And I have no idea whether these properties out in the interchange are something we would want, and why would we want them? What would we use them for?
I said, when people make these offers, they need to give us some way that if we wanted to do it, if it made sense. I didn't say it made sense. If it did, we cannot write a check for millions of dollars buying property because we're cash poor.
So
Layaway.
Matt and I were able to discuss very
Well-
briefly the interchange property, and as far as any kind of stormwater retention or, there are other priorities that we would recommend prior to this,
Oh,
to this
okay,
parcel.
Okay,
So that's one issue that we wanted to make sure we address with you, that we did look at it. If we were going to be looking at what we should be acquiring and what makes sense, there are other opportunities.
Well, I had, we also got an email that there was some consternation from Collier County in regard to the flowway along
Yes.
Logan Boulevard. So it brings up the question, would our plans for some kind of retention in that area be even more critical? And I don't know if this would affect it or not.
I think we identified there might be some other locations you'd want to, I'll let Matt kind of.
Well, the interchange property, although
It's a light touch today, Matt.
property for water quality, it certainly would serve a purpose for water quality. You could hold some water on it, but the problem that we faced last year was a very large problem, and so the solutions that Mr. Beaver identified about restoring those watersheds are really going to be they're going to be large coordination involved, but those are really going to be the types of projects that are going to help provide any sort of benefit. Just having small acreage, even if it's 100 acres for retention, is not, unless you build a 30-foot tall berm around it, is not going to probably make an appreciable difference for what we experience. So to answer your question, although there's some more regional coordination, larger permitting goals, the strategy that Mr. Beaver outlined about reestablishing those historical flowways and historical connections are really probably what's going to, in the long term, provide more of a benefit from what we experienced last summer.
And this doesn't fit in with that.
It doesn't fit in with that per se. It would certainly fit in with the water quality regulations that we have, where you hold water on the land and try to get it to percolate down. But in terms of what folks experienced last summer, I would say that it would be very marginal comparative to, say, a Logan flowway or reestablishing Spring Creek further to the north to its headwaters.
And in regard to water quality, we're already sort of on, we already have that somewhat under control in regard to what's required of us, or is that true or not true?
It's true. It's an ongoing process. It has 3 5-year increments, or I'm sorry, 3 5-year increments. We met our goal for the first 5-year period last year. We're actually exceeded a little bit of that goal, so that counts towards this current 5-year program. Projects like the Pine Lake Preserve will provide a quality component as well as a flood control component, so we expect to get some credit there, as well as with, the results of the bioreactor. If we can replicate that technology on a smaller scale, we'll also get credit. This project would certainly fit in there. It is within that regulatory boundary, but if you're looking for something trying to compare it to reestablishing historic flows into different watersheds, it's not capable of doing that.
Okay, thank you.
I would also want to indicate that Mr. Bieber had some conversations with individual property owners in that vicinity, and there was an interest from those folks to sell as well, and so you might have to mitigate issues as well. We're looking to see what opportunities there are with the CDBG program that we talked about, but we'd want to look holistically at what the results of the property requests of those people who actually had stormwater damage and are looking to be mitigated, as opposed to just the vacant land as well, and what makes sense there.
Thank you. Are we done?
So we did not provide any recommended funding for these items within the staff recommendation. We just wanted to provide the opportunity for you all to hear from the concerns that you received through emails.
Thank you.
And that would just leave us with the additional council discussion items. If there's anything you'd like us to address, or any questions you may have, or items you'd like to bring up for consideration.
I have to ask about the Collier County Logan Boulevard communication, or not lack of communication, or published in the media. What's happening with that?
So we understand that on the Collier County Commission agenda on Tuesday, there is an agenda item for a resolution expressing concern regarding the Logan Boulevard project, and that until review and proper vetting can be done by Collier County, they would object to the project until proper modeling is done. There was an article that was published in the Naples Daily News. They did ask for the progress from the city of where the project is. We explained that it was conceptual in nature at this point, and that it had been identified as a potential in the 2010 Lee County Watershed Project. And we also explained that would be happy to have any discussions and continuing conversations with staff as any plans developed. And we know that the Water Management District is currently working on the modeling of that project. We do not know how far along they are with the modeling. I did touch base with Phil Flood on Friday, who was going to work on giving us an update, and Mr. Barber has been in contact with, or is getting in contact with members of the Collier County Commission as well, to explain the historical flowway and the actual generation of the waters. I don't know if Matt has anything more he'd like to add to that, or if that summarized it.
No, I would just echo what Arlene said. These things are conceptual in nature. The Water Management District is doing some preliminary modeling. They have not shared those results. I don't believe they're in a position to share those results with us. So this is going to be, so to speak, a marathon. And we will coordinate. Obviously, we recognize that and understand that. And as the project develops, there'll be further coordination as we understand what those results, what the feasibilities are, and continue to work.
But it is clear that when we talked about this project, the South Florida Water Management was doing the modeling. There was never any suggestion that this would be done without doing the modeling, though it had been, I guess I inferred it from reading it in the paper that that was something that was not pursued, that we were very much involved with South Florida Water Management, who was doing the modeling for the flow.
They are doing the modeling.
They are.
They haven't shared the results yet.
Correct. So it isn't the case that Bonita Springs willy-nilly went off and decided that we were going to do this project without being aware of the concern that we don't want to hurt our neighbors as much as we don't want to be hurt by decisions that were made historically in regard to not recognizing the flow that is the natural process with the topography in Florida. Is that correct or not correct? Where have I erred in this thinking?
I don't believe you have.
Okay. I just
They're
wanna
working
make-
on the modeling. They
I
haven't.
just want that made clear to people who are reporting that this is a very deliberate process where we're trying to help our community, but also be aware that we're part of a larger community, be that in Collier County or Lee County.
Well, just to second your point, the premise always has been that the Water Management District would do it, and they would do it in a way that everyone, including
Right.
Collier County, is comfortable. That's what you're saying.
That's why we have a regional
That's why we have a regional
entity. I mean, it's not Bonita
Right.
Springs that's,
We're not doing
you
that.
know, they are participant, and in fact, they are responsible for the flows of water in both Lee and Collier County and are responsible for integrating that. Is that correct or not correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So why are we talking, why is this being reported in a different way?
I don't write the reports.
Tad?
He didn't write it.
Yeah, I know he didn't write it. And then if you want to drill down a little further, right, and Amy, that was well said. So yes, the flowway goes through Bonita Springs and potentially into Collier County. Where does all that water come from that flows into Bonita Springs? Maybe that ought to be part of the report as well.
Well, also consideration that there's a part of the water is going north, and I know that the water does not flow north. It flows from the northeast to the southwest. So there is already in place movement of water going to the Imperial River that, in my view, doesn't belong there. But that should come out of the studies that are coming out of South Florida Water Management.
I would say one thing, which is, the way I read that article, Andy did say he expects to work together. That was his bottom line. And it was more like, well, that's the first I heard of it. So to me, that report that was the first he heard of it. Which, but the
Okay.
context is we're all working together, and we always were working together.
Okay,
And we do understand the Water Management District is doing some outreach.
correct.
As we know more, we'll let everybody.
What, are we free for all now? What are we-
Are we done?
I'm going to say the next,
I
What's
just had,
next?
I had one thing really,
Sure,
which
keep
is, I talked to Arlene about this the other day briefly on Friday. I'd like to get a better line of sight, because there's an issue with this book which is absolutely appropriate. The book is done as it's supposed to be done for statutory accounting purposes, for government accounting purposes. But there's always an element of forest through the trees in this. You know, there's money here, there's money there, there's some general fund money, or we saw some of it on that money for downtown type of deal. And I'd like to just get, for the next meeting, a line of sight of, in the current year, all right, what are our main sources of funding? Well, they're everything that's in the general fund, that's myriad, primarily ad valorem, but there are other things. And you got your gas tax and impact fees. I'm not saying there's nothing else, but those are the basic three pockets, all right? So the gas taxes are what they're going to be, the impact fees are going to what I'm sure they're in here accurately. I'd like to have a more general sense of how much money in the next year staff is anticipating, based on the numbers in this book, of how much surplus, if any, are being thrown out of the general fund, after you take into account the revenue in the general fund and the expenses in the general fund. And the only thing I want to talk to Arlene about on this is, it's all presented here correctly, but there are general fund monies that are in other places, and they're general, and I'd like to get that, if it were a corporation, it would be a consolidated number in the general fund, as opposed to it's here, it's there. So I'll give you an example. The electric tax and the communication tax. When you look at the book, part of this is in the general fund, part of it, the number is in the general fund, part of it's back in the debt service fund. And why is that? Because Ann properly says that that increase is what we dedicated over there. But it's all one big flow of money. And I think it'd be helpful to us to understand, consolidated, these fund flows and the strain on the fund flows in the general fund, the expenses, what comes out the other end in terms of money. And then we have the impact fees and we have the guests. I'm not asking her to redo her accounting. I'm asking this for analytical purposes. So I'm going to chat with, that's all right, with Arlene about that. And I guess Ann, whatever.
Sounds like you're just wanting a sheet of, here's all our revenues. That's how much we got coming in.
General fund.
General fund.
General fund, right.
And then here's what's going out.
Right, right. But some of it is over in the debt service parts.
Well, it's earmarked.
It's earmarked.
For other
It's
things.
fine for her accounting purposes, but for
But it's still actual money
it's still
coming in. I don't
actual
care if
money.
it's going to
Right.
building department,
Right.
like with what John was wanting.
Right.
This is gonna come out of building fees, this is gonna come out
Right.
of general.
Right.
What's it gonna cost us for
And
those
there's,
6
and
people?
there's a corollary to that, which is what's going in annually into the debt service. There's no separate generation in the debt service fund other than these constructs that we've created, right?
Right.
That, you know, just they're constructs. It's the ad valorem and it's some impact fee money. That's what the money is. There's no separate, I'm here, I'm a revenue source for debt service.
No.
Right? So we've got, is it still 3.6 million, basically, the annual debt service? Yeah, 3.6 million. There's a shortfall, and that's got to be funded from other places in the debt service fund. So I just want to kind of get it all in one place so we can look at it, that's all.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Yeah,
That's
that's it.
Arlene?
Our eyeballs don't require professional accounting reporting purposes, right?
Well, I think they're,
No, but your point is well taken.
Concepts are important,
right.
rather than just looking at the numbers.
Arlene, do we have a plan for the vehicle replacement? Because I know last year when we got into it, I didn't think it was very practical, because once a car or SUV gets a certain age and so many miles on it, its cost to repair becomes very expensive. And none of these repairs anymore are inexpensive. And you're better off to have cars that are newer, SUVs that are newer, that have less maintenance costs, and we can buy them through state purchasing at a good price. And I would like to think, even though we probably don't have time to reflect it in this budget, but we need to get a better plan of attack where you balance, to look at maintenance, what that's going to be, versus what new cars cost through the state purchasing. And you can do way better than we've been doing. I know Greg DeWitt's, at one time, we almost had an argument over this, but it was on a minor point. Globally, he was more right than wrong. That with what you can buy stuff for from state purchasing and what you can resell it for, as long as you keep it 2 to 3 years old, you can kind of get to a point once you get the thing rolling where it's not costing you that much.
And then, right, who's doing the repairs, and is it time to look at competitive bidding on the repairs, or what's that process? In the same breath.
So on the 16th, you'll see we have a line item for vehicle replacement and repair of $100,000, and that's with an evaluation of each of the condition of the vehicles, good, fair, poor, and the mileage of each of them. And so we're working on a replacement plan, and we'll continue to build that each time and evaluate whether at what point in the $100,000 does it make more sense to purchase the new vehicle or to make the repair.
Yeah, all I'm trying to say is that I know that Greg spent a lot of time on it. Why don't you tell him?
Well, it's just,
If-
I
if
mean,
a-
what Councilman Ford was talking about is like at the fire department, every 5 to 8 years, we're replacing vehicles, no matter what. And we start putting money, a little bit of money away for it, so we don't have, when it's time to replace 4 vehicles to the tune of $145,000 for 4 vehicles, you don't have that added cost right then.
Right.
You put $20,000 away each year for that anticipated. And what I was referring to with the state bid, we can get anything from Ford Escapes for $21,000, where they're normally 30-something on the open market.
Right.
And you can get into an area of, if you wanted to, buy them for 21, keep them for 2 years, sell them for 21, and pay for it that way. Or you keep them for the 5 to 8 years. Both concepts have been tried and true out there, because you could always justify it. Look, we're getting top dollar for them, we're getting the best fuel economy and the safest vehicle for our employees if we do it every 2 years versus every 5.
I had one other comment and a question. So on page 5, which is just seeing this for the first time, but the budget at a glance, I guess I would just underscore for everybody, and this is a major point to me, the projected unassigned fund balance is 0. Last year, it was $5 million. I mean, that's like context for everything we're doing. And then the other question I have is, it was alluded to before, Ann, but the road impact fees is $7.9 million for projected unassigned fund balance for October of this year, $7.9 million. How do the Wonder Gardens work? That's increased by 3? How do the Wonder Gardens accounting factor into that number? It boosted it or not?
It did boost it because when we repaid the
Right.
loan, because that money became available.
So
Yes.
it came out of the general fund and went into the road impact fee fund?
Right.
And how much was that, 2 million or 3 million?
It was a total of $3 million.
3 million, all right, so that explains that. So because last year was 3,000,007, it's 2017 opening fund balance. No, projected closing fund balance.
Right.
And now it's $4 million more, so 3 million of that is the Wonder Gardens.
Correct.
All right. And that also, enough said, okay, thank you. What are our possible revenue sources? Do ad valorem taxes and these communication taxes? If we think about revenue,
Yeah,
that's it?
They're summarized on page 1.
Page 1?
Page 1 shows all funds combined. It's a consolidated
No, I
presentation.
mean, if we were interested, levers that we could push to increase revenue.
Oh, to increase, yeah.
It's basically the ad valorem and...
Ad valorem, the
and
communication services, and the electric franchise
Okay,
fees.
is there anything else? I'm not suggesting there is, I'm just asking.
No, 'cause we just
Other
did
than
the park
fees or,
fees.
yeah.
That we have control over. We just did, like, the public works permit fees were
Right.
increased
Or
recently.
parks
and the
fees or
parks
something,
were
yeah, right.
increased recently.
Impact fees.
That's not a lot of money.
And the impact fees
Yeah,
were.
impact fees would be,
Yeah, but they're regulated.
Right.
You're talking about disposable
There's nothing else.
cash.
Yeah.
And I think you bring up a good point, Pete, when you talk about the carry forward or the fund balance. This year is 0, where last year it was
5 million.
Yeah, 5 million,
Yeah, it was
4.9.
4.994, yeah. At least, this is the early draft.
Yeah.
On page 7, is it a misprint for the local communication services tax? For the original budget for 17-18 and then expected? Because on page 1, you're showing the 15-16 is the exact same number, but when you go beyond that, the numbers vary a lot.
What page on 7 then?
Yeah, 7 and also 1.
On page 1 includes the portion that's going into the debt service fund. Page 1 is the total of all funds.
See, that's an
Oh,
example.
okay, so
That's an
page
example of
7 is
what
only what's
Right.
going into the
It's
general
general
fund.
That's an
Okay.
example of what I'm talking about. Yeah. You also have ad valorem, a little bit ad valorem tax going
In
into
the
the
debt service fund, that's correct.
But so on the communication services tax, it's actually going down.
It is. We experienced an audit from the state adjustment of our revenue that they reduced our payment about $38,000 for the month of December. And in reading through some other jurisdictions' budget books, it looks like there may have been some issues with some funding that was being allocated to other, like to us, that should have been going perhaps to another jurisdiction. And so we're seeing, since that audit adjustment, we're seeing less a trend as you compare to the prior year, month to month, a slight decrease.
So how's that based? They figure out what was
Well,
collected and what should be divvied up between
It's
the
tied to,
jurisdictions?
under Matt's department, a GIS person does submit boundary information to them, and that's what is used for determining if a location is within which jurisdictional boundaries. So as long as that's kept up to date, but we don't control how they actually are distributing it. It's being sent to the state, and then they use their information to allocate the jurisdiction that gets the funding. But it's important for us to keep our information current.
So the decrease is because of they're changing the boundaries, or they realize
Or they
that
realize
somebody
that
that
they
we were
were-
getting money from is actually in Collier
Correct.
County or somewhere
Correct.
else.
Mhm.
Okay.
And I think part of it that has come up is with the incorporation of Estero, and with, what properties are in Estero, which properties
Where
are.
before they had a Bonita mailing address, so we were probably getting the money,
Correct,
and now the
correct.
money's.
And I think that's
The
one of
nerve.
the reasons, once they get their own zip code, that may help that.
Can I also ask on the quadrant plan, whatever we're going to get from the state and the federal government, which is, I forget, 11 or 12 million or 13 million, is that, go back and think about it, is that in here? And if it is, I would break that out.
Break out the
Break out
funding
the source of funding. It actually used to be done years ago in Gary. You know, you could look at any road project and you'd see the funding source under it.
And that's what
Well,
Arlene had
we're
mentioned, that
we're gonna have that the
for
next
next
meeting.
Monday.
Great.
After the 5-year.
It's going to have an
Plans done.
acronym, general GF, general fund.
Exactly.
Exactly how it had in the past,
Right.
yes.
I'm done. Can I say thank you to Ann and the whole staff and all the hard work?
Thank you.
Arlene?
And the directors had a lot of
Yeah.
involvement.
Yeah.
What else? Closing thoughts, or Fred?
Well, I think what's been done here is great. I think due to Irma and a whole lot of other things that have happened, it would be great if we could have had this meeting about maybe a month ago or a month and a half ago. Sooner we can get into this higher level, all that, I think it's good, but I think this is great, and I'm sure next year that we'll be able to get to that earlier meeting.
Council?
Yep.
Mike, you okay? Peter?
Yep.
Craig?
Good.
Amy?
Good.
If there's anything that comes up in the interim between now and Monday that we could provide additional information on, if you just let us know, we'll do our best to have it for Monday.
Monday at 9.
And
Just
we do
wanna
have an
make a point.
additional, Mayor, we do have an additional public comment before we
Right,
close.
yes, absolutely.
Just an aside, Kathy and I were away in a country that has, called Ireland, that has roundabouts throughout the entire country, everywhere. The only traffic signals you see sometimes are actually for pulsing into the roundabouts. In the entire country.
Great.
Not, no,
Downtown Dublin, no traffic
well,
lights.
no,
I mean,
no,
you know what
no,
I'm saying?
no, they're
Yeah.
basically, I mean, there might be one or two.
Yeah, right, but not many.
So, you know, I was reading, I mean, nothing personal, right, but I was reading something about up in Fort Myers, and I know they had this in Estero. Oh my gosh, the roundabouts, it's like, it's what, Fred, you were there, we're at the MPO.
Yeah.
And, you know, same thing is true of Carmel, Indiana, and good, you were up there.
Yep.
Same thing in Indianapolis. I'm not saying I'm for roundabouts everywhere, but when we were last at the MPO, well, when I was last at the MPO, Fred, made this point, there needs to be a better education effort on this,
Oh.
so people understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking to your point at the last meeting
Right.
that I was at, they had a handout, which I've got, that's all about roundabouts, statistics on people getting hurt or injured by vehicles, vehicle accidents, all kind of information on roundabouts. And they're supposed to be going to give us that so we can put it on our website or put a link to their website with it being on. But I've got a hard copy of that, and I'll get it reproduced and see to it that everybody gets it in their inbox. Because it's got a lot of the information, not everything, but a lot more than we've had in the past.
And there ought to be a point made at the MPO to FDOT, and I thought they were going to come up with some stuff. Public service announcements. Now, Lee Health did do something about a year or two ago.
Right.
But get public service announcements out there, just explaining how they work, et cetera. It's just kind of mind-boggling to me because, you know, here's a country I went to, it's like full of tourists from all over the place. And you hear, oh, well, people from all over the country down here, they can't handle the roundabouts. It's just,
Right.
that.
Yeah, no,
I know it's not a budget item, but since we made
How
it.
were they driving on the wrong side
Easy.
of the road, by the way,
Easy.
and the wrong side of the car?
The only
All
problem
right.
is a lot of the roads are 500 years old and they were that wide, but that was not a left side, right side, or roundabout.
But I've seen the rental cars in Europe too, they're tiny.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
as big
yeah.
as this table.
Thank God I got a school.
Right.
Traffic calming, that's why they have small.
Yeah, traffic calming.
Because they have small widths.
Anyhow, that's
No,
just.
good point, good point. Public comment? Anybody from the public that would? Okay,
Oh, Bill. Good.
okay. Anything else? Closing thoughts, parting thoughts, parting shots? Okay. Excellent, thank you very much.
Thank you,
See
Arlene.
everybody next Monday.
Yeah.
Great job.